just maybe start with a quotation of the Bodhisattva Charastara. Well, Shantideva, he said the leisures and endowments are very hard to find, since they accomplish the purpose of beings. If I do not accomplish the benefit upon this, how will I acquire this in the future? Yeah, so as we know, the opportunity we have right now as having the precious human rebirth, and the precious human rebirth, with what it says here, leisures or freedoms and endowments, this is very rare. Most of you know the 18 aspects of the freedoms and endowments of the precious human rebirth, and also how difficult it is to acquire, and it has great meaning. So that means that in the verse next to that, then also Shantideva says that it's like lightning, it's very short. So also in Lama Tsongkhapa's Songs of Experience, also there, Lama Tsongkhapa says it is like lightning, it's light, it's just a few seconds, just split second, right? A second or two in the dark sky. So that means that the precious human rebirth, in the darkness of the possibility, the precious human rebirth is kind of lightning in a dark night, meaning that in the time of degeneration, then it's very difficult to move the mind in a spiritual kind of path. And because of the darkness of ignorance, because of the darkness of the destructive emotions, so to have an opportunity to do something about it, it's just like lightning, so short. That is also true for our precious human rebirth, because to have these 18 freedoms and endowments by itself is extremely rare. If you just think about how rare it is to meet a spiritual path by itself, it's very difficult. You just can look at world evolutions of billions and billions of years, then there's only a few thousand years, then there's a little bit of spirituality, and before and after that it's slightly different and slightly more difficult. Yeah, so that way we're very fortunate, and just look at our own planet, Earth, since its origin, until the present. When we were walking around, people walking around in different kind of creatures on this planet, and so spirituality is very rare, and then to find spirituality that is focused upon love and kindness, compassion, and wisdom, it's even more rare. Right? So if you think about world evolutions, extremely rare. So then to have found these teachings of the Buddhist doctrine that helps us to progress us in the spiritual paths of generating renunciation, bodhicitta, and emptiness, is even more rare than you can imagine. Just look at the numbers of people on the planet, and then see how many of them are interested in spirituality, how many of them are interested in changing the mind. It's a very small number, And among those people who are interested, there's even a smaller number of people who really study it and try to put into practice. So then you can see that is very rare, as Shantideva says. So it's time to use this precious human rebirth. Another quotation, he refers to the boat, right? That can still samsaric suffering, the ocean of samsaric suffering, to the shore of liberation and enlightenment. So if you don't use this boat now, then you'll be considered as a fool who is asleep. That's what Shantideva says. So that means that we're very fortunate to have this incredible opportunity. If you don't use it now, then when will you use that opportunity? Dharmakirti, one of the masters of logic and methodology, he says, if you don't take the aspects of this precious human rebirth, if you don't take the, I would say, masena, if you don't hold onto it and take the essence right now, when will you take the essence? Then now we have the capacity, now we have the intelligence, now we have the freedom to think. That's not always present, So some people live in war situations. Some people live in countries without the freedom of religion, So it's very rare, so to say, to have a spiritual path and you have some interest in that, So that's, So that is extremely rare, and then has great meaning. right? Because depending on the present human rebirth, we can accomplish many things. Happiness in this life, happiness in future lifetimes, liberation and enlightenment. So that's all depends on the present human rebirth as we have at the moment. Most of us don't really realize how lucky we are. Yeah, to have found this particular place on earth in this particular time with the teaching. Yeah, very well. So that's why we have to take the essence. So today I was planning to go over the three principal aspects of the path, as a Lamrim text. You can find it 141. Yeah. So that's the three principal aspects of the path is actually summarizes the whole path to enlightenment. Three principal aspects. And that's one very profound text by Lama Tsongkhapa, who wrote this on based upon Atisha's Lamp of the Path and many other masters the past text on the Lamrim, or the stages of the path to enlightenment. So what are the three principal aspects? Yeah, renunciation, bodhicitta, and emptiness. They are the most essential aspects of our training. And then the most important two ones, of course, bodhicitta and emptiness. So Holiness Dalai Lama often indicates to be our most important things. But without renunciation, you will never be able to generate bodhicitta. Why? Because bodhicitta is a mind that wishes all sentient beings to be free of suffering and likes to accomplish the state of enlightenment for that purpose. Right? Bodhicitta has kind of two aspirations, a causal aspiration and a resultant aspiration. The causal one is that motivates us initially, meaning contemplating different aspects of suffering sentient beings and then generate a wish to be free, to free them from all forms of suffering, in particular, the all-pervasive compounding form of suffering. And the wish to free them is kind of the causal motivation or aspiration that brings us towards generation of bodhicitta. So if you really, we come to that later, but then you get a layout. So that means that bodhicitta has two aspirations. One is the wish for sentient beings to be free of suffering, and the other one is to achieve enlightenment for that purpose. So in order to get the first aspiration of wanting sentient beings to free them from suffering, we first have to understand suffering ourselves. If you don't understand suffering yourself, how can you generate a wish for others? Yeah, so that's very essential. So that's why you need renunciation. Renunciation is a preliminary, so to say, towards generating great compassion, because renunciation means a wish to be free from suffering yourself. If you don't understand suffering yourself, you cannot generate a wish to be free of that. Yeah, so that's why in the Buddhist doctrine we spend quite some time on the building scope to understand what is suffering ourselves. It is not to make us depressed, something like that. It's to let us wake up and see that we are in a state which is not perfect yet. We can do something about it to become more perfect. So that's why the Buddha first taught the truth of suffering. The first teaching was to wake us up and see, look, you have this kind of circumstances. If you like to stay in that, fine. But if you see that the circumstances you're facing are not perfect, because we have different types of suffering like birth, sickness, old age, death, meeting things you don't like to meet, and there's many things in life. I don't have to tell you too much about it. That you actually can see that we have all types of suffering. So if you really understand it well, then you can generate a wish for others to be free as well. Suffering. So that's very important. So the causal aspiration, compassion, is based upon renunciation. Because without renunciation, there is no real compassion to be generated. So that's why that stage is there. So that means the first three principal aspect of the path, right? Renunciation is the first one. Then compassion is the causal aspiration, as I said, of bodhicitta. Bodhicitta also has a resultant aspiration, meaning if you really want to do something for others, do you have the capacity right now to do that or not? So then we have the resultant aspiration, which is referring to wanting to accomplish the state of enlightenment. For that purpose. For which purpose? To liberate sentient beings from their suffering. So in order to achieve the state of enlightenment, if you don't eliminate ignorance together with the seeds and their imprints, you will never be able to achieve the state of omniscience or the state of fully enlightened being. So you have to realize emptiness, you see. So that means that without wisdom realizing emptiness, you will never be able to accomplish enlightenment. So that's why emptiness comes into the picture. So that's another aspect of the three principal aspects of the path. So the center is bodhicitta, right? And the preliminary to bodhicitta is renunciation. And in order to accomplish your wish you have with bodhicitta, wanting to become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings, you have to realize emptiness based on the motivation of bodhicitta. You see, so that's why the three principal aspects of the path are combined like that. Yeah. So this text by Lama Tsongkhapa lays out very clearly, you know, the three principal aspects of the path. So it's a very precious text, and I received on many occasions from His Holiness, from many masters. Yeah, it's a text they often use as an introduction to the Lamrim. Sometimes His Holiness gives in a few minutes. Sometimes it can be explained over hours and hours and hours. Yeah? So we do it in about, what is it? Yeah, whatever time we have left, 3 hours with a break halfway through. So yeah, three principal aspects of the path. It starts with the homage, you know, that's always in the beginning of every text. It starts with a homage in order to pay respect to the masters of the lineage and to see its a pure origin. That's very important. Even in Tibetan, in the Tibetan tradition, it follows the Nalanda tradition of India, as you know, is a very strong emphasis on origin. It's very important, the authentic aspects of particular teachings. Yeah, so that's why the masters of the past have done that. Yeah, I'm a very traditional person in general, although I like to combine things with science, but I don't like to go out of the tradition in the sense of making something completely new. Yeah. So because I know I've been in this tradition for more than 2 decades, and I know it works. It's not an easy tradition, as you know. It's a very academic tradition. There's a lot of philosophy and a lot of debate going on, and a lot of scriptures. But if you put some effort, then it has great benefits, you know. And that's why His Holiness Dalai Lama many occasions indicates the need for study and the need for really understanding. Because if you study these things well in depth, then things start to make sense, you know. Makes sense in the sense of you start to comprehend the meaning. And then study doesn't mean one evening session or 2 evening sessions or a few weekends, right? So over time, yeah, we have to study mainly the Lamrim in order to understand bodhicitta. We study, for example, Bodhisattvacharya Avatara, right? Or to understand emptiness, we study the special insight sections in the more elaborate Lamrims. Yeah, so that's quite important. Yeah. So then here, Lama Tsongkhapa pays respects to the masters of the paths, right? Yes, and Lama Namdak Chatsalo. So I bow down to my perfect gurus. So in Tibetan we say Jetsun Lama. It is translated as perfect gurus, but it's actually in Tibetan 3 terms: Jetsun Lama. So there's actually 3 words, and those 3 words also referring to the 3 principal aspects of the path: Jetsun Lama. Renunciation, Je, renunciation, Tsun from you know, yeah, bodhicitta, and then Lama can refer to emptiness. That's one interpretation. Or the 3 higher trainings sometimes it refers to. Je is then mostly referred to wisdom, and then Tsun to kasa, to morality, and then Lama is in reference to constriction. So sometimes it's being referring to the 3 principal aspects of the path or the 3 higher trainings. Anyway, that's detail, but yeah, so pay homage to the masters of the lineage. And then there's a promise to compose the text. Yeah. So that is also in the beginning of many texts. We see that the masters of the past, they like to, you know, they mostly requested. Yeah, they never teach if they haven't been requested, and then they make a promise to compose. So that's verse number 1 in a text. It says the essential meaning of the victorious one's teaching, the path praised by all the victorious and their children, the gateway of the fortunate ones desiring liberation. I shall try to explain this as much as I can. So the essential meaning of the victorious one's teachings, right? That can also be referring to the renunciation, yeah, because the first teaching of the Buddha, as we know, is the Four Noble Truths. Yeah? And among the Four Noble Truths, the first truth is the truth of suffering. And so that's kind of in referring to generating renunciation, right? So the essential meaning of the victorious one's teachings actually comes about and talks about the Four Noble Truths, right? The truth of suffering, the true cause of suffering, true cessation, and true paths. Yeah? And the part that praised by the victorious and their children, so the victorious ones and their children, reference to the children, referring to bodhisattvas, Geshe, Tibetan. So children, meaning, sons or daughters of the victorious ones. And victorious ones, the victory, or the victorious one is kind of a person who is victorious over the afflictions, yeah, who has accomplished the state of enlightenment. That's kind of what we often indicate as a victorious one. And then those who are their children are the bodhisattvas. Yeah, we talked about bodhicitta, the mind that wishes all beings to be free from suffering, and for that purpose, like to achieve enlightenment. So that means that the person who has this mind in their continuum, they call bodhisattvas. Yeah? Bodhisattva is a person. Bodhicitta, bodhicitta. Body means enlightenment. Chit, or chitta, means mind. Right? So that's the mind of enlightenment. Then bodhisattva, the sattva, the aspect refers to an heroic aspect. Pao is in Tibetan. So that means people with very heroic attitudes based on the mind of enlightenment. So why heroic? Because the mind of enlightenment is very vast. I want to become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings without exception. Is very vast from the point of view of generating it, and very vast from the point of view of the activities of the bodhisattvas. Yeah? And very vast of the results, enlightenment. Yeah? So that means the victorious one, so to say. So the children of that, the bodhisattvas, they kind of this heroic approach, they don't give up, never give up. Yeah, it's a very important aspect of the training, right? Because if you give up, then you give the victory to the afflictions. Sometimes things are difficult in life, and then we give up. So then we give the victory to the afflictions and not we become the victorious one ourselves. So it's always important to have this heroic attitude. So keep going, even in difficult times. Yeah, and that's a real heroic attitude. Even if things are very difficult, and you see it as an obstacle to the practice. Like as Holiness, in the early days, some threats, then someone said, "Oh, the Chinese killed me. Doesn't matter. I just continue next lifetime." This kind of, they look at this big picture. That's very important for us because we always got sucked into small things in life. Our problems, they're small, and we make them huge, right? We make ourselves center of the universe. But if you think about vastness of enlightenment activities and lifetimes, then 1 or 2 year a little bit difficulty in life is peanuts, right? Compared to so now you see Tibetans in occupied Tibet in prison, very difficult. Just forget our difficulty in the West. That's real difficult. That if you're in a prison and tortured and almost dying out of starvation, but they can deal with it so well. Not all of them, but the majority. It's because of this incredible vast vision. Okay, 1 or 2 decades and be tortured and almost at the edge of death, but I just keep going. And I saw many, including a few of my own classmates, who've been tortured and have physical problems because of that. But mentally, they're very strong, extremely strong. And that's very interesting. And that comes from this kind of heroic approach, right? This kind of strong compassion and understanding love, cause and effect, and karma. That's very interesting. Yeah. So the part praised by all the holy victors and the victorious ones. Yeah, so that refers to bodhicitta. Because all the Buddhas, they praise bodhicitta, and all the bodhisattvas, they praise bodhicitta, because the best things that can be accomplished in a human life, or in human lifetimes, is to generate bodhicitta. If you have generated bodhicitta, then whatever you do day and night becomes a cause for enlightenment. You know, so that's why it's praised by all the victorious ones. Yeah, the gateway of the victorious ones desiring liberation. Line number 3 in the first verse refers to emptiness, because emptiness is the gateway. In the sense, without emptiness, you will never be able to achieve liberation, and you will never be able to achieve enlightenment. So you need kind of, yesterday, those who were there, we talked a little bit about emptiness, not much. Today we'll touch about it a bit more. Because ignorance is the cause for us to go around in samsara, and emptiness is the antidote. Yeah, so if you understand emptiness, then you'll be able to eliminate ignorance. Yeah, so that's why it's kind of the gateway of the 14 ones desiring liberation. Because without emptiness, you cannot achieve liberation, you cannot achieve enlightenment. So I shall try to explain as much as I can, Namsukapa says, in a very humble way. Yeah. So then he asks us to listen. Yeah. So those who are not attached to the pleasures of cyclic existence or samsara, who strive to make freedom and endowments meaningful. And we just talked about the difficulty it is, how difficult it is to acquire a human rebirth with freedoms and endowments. And if you strive for that purpose to use this incredible opportunity we have, then who entrust themselves to the path pleasing the victorious ones, you fortunate ones listen with a calm mind. Yeah, so it means listen carefully. Yeah. So, yeah. So, meaning that if you listen to talks or Dharma teachings, then you have to be attentive and then try to get most out of it. So we have the 3 vessels upside down, one with a hole, and one with stains, right? So if the vessel is upside down, a cup upside down, then you can pour water, but it doesn't go in, right? So if you kind of completely asleep, then you won't get anything out of the talk. Yeah. So that's important to pay attention. Then on top of that, if there's a hole in the vessel, although you can pour in the water, but it goes down straight. That means if you don't really contemplate and think and make notes and after the talk reflect upon those notes, then it's kind of a vessel with a hole in it. People ask you, oh, what did Namdak tell? What did Namdak teach today? You say, yeah, it was trivial aspect of the part, and yeah, and then always getting here. So that's kind of the hole in the vessel, right? So we try to prevent it. Kunalama Rinpoche, one of the masters of the Bodhisattva Charavatara, one of the teachers of His Holiness, actually, Kunalama Rinpoche, he has an incredible memory, people said, of teachings, So then once, I don't know who asked him how he did it. But then he said, this particular fault of the vessel has to be avoided, meaning when you think, when you listen to a teaching, you be attentive, you make notes. Then after the teaching is finished, instead of just closing the book and think, okay, that was it, nice. The next event in life, right? So instead of doing that, then Kunalama Rinpoche would go over his notes and reflect. What did the teacher say? What did he talking about? And then you comprehend the material much better. And then also an aspect of listening to the teaching is kind of, you should try to listen over like it's completely new, like a young child taking to a water park or kind of, how do you call this? Fun park, right? So the young child, so fun. Oh. Yeah. So if you have that attitude, you absorb so much more. Sometimes we hear same things over and over again, and then, yeah, I heard this before. Then that by itself becomes a kind of distraction, right? You don't, because you're thinking about, I heard this before, that distraction from listening. So that's why we need to prevent this vessel with a hole inside. Yeah, and that's also true when you read a book. When you read a book, then also you have to be attentive in order to absorb material and think about it. So if you read a book page by page and then think about it, you retain the material much better as well. It's kind of the first two faults of the vessel, either upside down or with a hole in it. Then also there's the vessel which is not upside down and there's no hole, but there's dirt inside. So that means if you listen with incorrect motivations, so to say, then yeah, also the Dharma will not become pure. So in order to become pure Dharma, we should be motivated at least expression, rebirth, liberation, enlightenment. It's only for the purpose of one particular short-sighted kind of aspects then yeah, cannot really be of great benefit. So that's why we prevent the vessel from having dirt. So yeah, so that's kind of the three types of the vessel to be prevented. So listen with a calm mind, be attentive. So yeah. So then next is the purpose for generating renunciation. Yeah. So that means that why do we have to contemplate these points? Yeah. Why do we have to contemplate renunciation, bodhicitta, and emptiness? So in the Lamrim, for you, most of you have studied a little bit Lamrim, so it's always very important to know, why do I meditate on this? What's the reason? How do I do it? And how do I know I did it correctly? That's very clearly set out in this particular text. It's not in a root text, but based on one of the commentaries by Pabonka Rinpoche, the outline has been put in this translation. Yeah. So it's also important to know, why do I do something? How do I do it? And how do I know I did it correctly? We have to double check if we are going the right direction. For example, death and impermanence, we contemplate for a particular purpose, to generate a kind of effort into the spiritual path. If you contemplate death and impermanence, and then how do you do that? Is you contemplate what you normally call the three roots and three reasons of each of the root, that is certain, or that is definite, basically. That the time of death is uncertain, and when we die, only our spiritual progress will be of benefit. So that's how we meditate on death and impermanence. Then how do you know you did it correctly? If you contemplate that we're going to die, and yeah, so sometimes we celebrate birthday parties, that. So it's kind of, if you celebrate a birthday party, it's nice, but actually the reality is you're not a year closer to death. That's what it is, right? It's kind of, yeah, how many candles today? But actually, it's basically is you can blow out all the candles, but the thing that you celebrate is strange. In one way, it's strange because you think, oh, another year. If you're a young child, you want to be old, but if you're older, you want to be young, right? So it's a very strange thing. Because then, you're getting closer to death. That's what it means, another year closer. So if you like to celebrate that, in one way, on a conventional level, it's okay. But if you have that discriminating factor, it's quite interesting. Also, if you look at a clock with split seconds, for example, then you see the clock ticking. Or yeah, right. If you have split seconds, it goes very fast. Yeah. If you don't have any seconds, it's okay. It's now it's 15:46, so it stays for some time. It doesn't really seems to move, right? But when there's split seconds, it goes very fast. So if you look at a clock with split seconds, it's quite beneficial. Then you see, oh, I'm going to die, right? And then we don't know when, because it can happen any moment. It can happen any moment of time. You can just go to bed and not wake up tomorrow. So, or just, one of my friends, she had a conversation with her mother like this, and then looked the other direction, mother collapsed. Like that. So that means it can happen any moment. So yesterday we talked a little bit about death and impermanence. It's a very, very powerful motivation. So that means that the purpose of that is to motivate ourselves. And you see that also people will have a near-death experience. Yeah, people who have cardiac arrest and almost dying, and then the body leave the body, come back. The majority of the people who have a near-death experience, their life changes in a very positive, very compassionate, very spiritual way. You know? So that's direct proof of the benefits of contemplating death and impermanence. You know? It's not to make us depressed, because if it causes you to become depressed, then you didn't do correctly. You know? Or some Westerners or people you meet, and then but the dead and permanent say, oh, there's no point in making plans because I can die any moment. Of course, you can die any moment, but you have to make plans, right? On a conventional level, you have to think, okay, as long as I'm not dying, then I do this and this and this and this, right? Yeah. So that's kind of, we have to check if the meditation produces the result that has to be produced. So that's why this particular Lamrim text, it talks about the purpose of generating renunciation, the purpose of generating bodhicitta, the purpose of generating emptiness, and then how to do that. And then after that, to check if you did it correctly. You know, so that's what it says. So here, the purpose of generating renunciation, it says without the complete intention, definitely to be free from cycling around in samsara, there is no way to pacify attachment seeking pleasure or pleasurable effects in the ocean of circling. Yeah. So also by craving for cycling resistance, a body and being are continuous bound, therefore, at the very beginning, seek renunciation. So that means that if you really want to get out of samsaric suffering, then you have to do something. If you have a problem in life and you don't face that problem and you try to escape it all the time, that's not very healthy. You know, so that means if you have a problem in life and you face it and you look, okay, what's the problem here? This is the problem. How is it caused? What is the real cause of this? Then you learn so much more. You know? And then also you can come to a kind of questioning. Can I do something and do it about it or not? You know, if you don't really, if you avoid the problem, then you will never come to this question. Can I do something about it? You're just stuck into it. You know, so with samsaric suffering, very similar. If that's why the Buddha taught the first noble truth, the truth of suffering, as the first teaching, to let us see that we not have the perfect state yet. You know, sometimes we have a bit of happiness and then we keep it, and then yeah, it's okay. And yeah, that's why many people, they enter into these kind of things by having seen a certain amount of suffering. You know, so that means that if you see that your state is not perfect, and then you question yourself, what is the cause for all this, and is there a way out? You know, when I was when I was a university student, then of course I was quite happy. Not that I was completely depressed. That's why I became a Buddhist. I was quite okay, you know. But you know, you ask questions, right? You have quite okay life, parties and yeah, studies going well to a certain extent. So, but then still, there's kind of these questions you have. What's the meaning of life? What is the purpose of this all? So you start asking a lot of questions. And that's very good. We have to ask questions. Without asking questions, then we just be stuck in the same kind of situation. So that's why the Buddha's kindness let us examine things. Are we in a perfect situation right now or not? If not, what is the problem? If you know the problem, can you do something about it? And if so, how? That's exactly what the Buddha described in Four Noble Truths. There's a problem we call suffering, and the suffering is being caused by something. And there's a time or a state or possibility to be free of suffering, because suffering is caused by afflictions, and destructive emotions or these afflictions, they can be taken away. Yesterday we saw they're not encounter reality, that's why they can be taken away. They're not an inner part of the mind. The blue sky is not innate one with the clouds. The clouds are separate. So that means the clouds of the destructive emotions can be taken away. And the clouds of the destructive emotions are not in constant reality. We saw yesterday that all those destructive emotions are not in constant reality. There's no reason we can take them away by understanding reality. So then you see, okay, there's a problem, there's a cause of the problem, and we can do something about it to solve it. And that's exactly the sequence of the Four Noble Truths, right? First, suffering, the cause of suffering, then the possibility to be free of it, and how to do that. And so same as you have a sickness, the doctor asks you what's wrong, what's the nature of the sickness, what is the cause of it, then your question will be, can I be cured? And if so, how? So it's the same sequence, right? As the Buddhist doctrine talked about. Yeah. If you cannot get cured, then we're wasting our time here. And we might as well go for walks or something. We try to enjoy life the best way we can. Yeah. Luckily, we can do something about it. Yeah. So that's why we study the three principles of path. So that's kind of the first section is basically talks about the purpose of generating renunciation. Yeah. So that's to wake up, so to say, to wake up and to see that, you know, there's kind of something is wrong and we want to do something about it. Yeah, so that's the purpose of it. So then next question is, how do we generate renunciation? Then it says, freedoms and endowments are difficult to find, and life has no time to spare. That we just talked about. You know, we have the precious human rebirth, and it's like lightning. From the point of view, it's extremely rare to find it. And on top of the rareness, it's over before you know it. So that means life has no time to spare. That refers to impermanence and death. We just talked about death is definite. The time of death is uncertain. And the only thing that helps us at the time of death is our spiritual progress. Because you can have millions of followers on Instagram. There's not one of them who comes along when you die. And followers, they all remain behind. And they remain behind in their own kind of bubble of Instagram or whatsoever. So they cannot really come. Yeah? There's no followers, go alone. So that because you go alone when you die, your body also you have to leave behind. So whatever kind of, say, what do you call it? This kind of bodybuilding thing you do, it will not be of great benefit. Even Bruce Lee, because I was into martial arts, Bruce Lee was kind of martial arts hero, right, in the early days for teenagers. But also he died. He was a strong guy, but yeah, he also died, right? And was related with mental issues. So it's very interesting. But so if you're physically very strong, but mentally not really, then it doesn't improve much. So that means that what helps when we die is our mental development, you know. And if you understand reality a little bit better, then when you die, there's so much more peace. You know? If you understand death and dying, we don't have to fear death because we died so many times already. So countless times, right? So there's nothing to worry about. You know? But also, if you understand reality, yesterday we talked about those destructive emotions are not in constant reality, right? And they cause a lot of disturbance. But if you understand reality, yesterday we talked about there's no real self. We're going to talk about in this second session. So that if you understand that reality, that gives you so much peace. You know? So that's that David Bohm, for example, who understood some aspects of this reality through quantum mechanics. There is no real self-deceptive thought or the self-identity. The self is not really there, I said yesterday. It's just like a show. So he, if you see him, he's a very, very interesting personality to talk about reality in this way, and also a very relaxed kind of mind. Probably. And that's proved, it's been proven because when he was dying, he wrote his wife, who was not in the same country at that time, he wrote her and he said, sorry, he said, because he was always so excited about new projects, new kind of research, that he never was satisfied with any kind of research. So then he wrote his wife, he said, oh, at least now it looks like something is coming to an end. So that he was dying, you know. So very interesting. So that means people who understand reality a bit better, the fear for death and these kind of aspects are much less. Yeah. So yeah, life has no time to spare. By gaining familiarity with this, right, to familiarize yourself, habituate yourself, actions to the appearance of this life is reversed. So that part of the text talks about giving up this life. Giving up this life doesn't mean to live on the street or live in a cave, something like that. People who live in the mountains, in retreats, there are still people who haven't given up this life. You know the story, right? Of Don Tompa, one of the previous emanations of His Holiness. At the time of Atisha, Don Tompa was walking around and then he saw this person reciting text, Holy Scriptures, Then he asked the person, "What are you doing?" And then this person said, I'm reading the Holy Scriptures, then Don Tompa said, "Oh, very good, but better practice the Dharma." So this person thought, "Oh, that's strange. Maybe I should go around the stupa, circumambulate, right? Go around, And then he did that, and then Don Tompa came, and then he asked, he met, and then Don Tompa said, "Oh, what are you doing?" He said, "I'm circumambulating this holy object, you see." And then Don Tompa said, "Oh, interesting, very good, but better practice the Dharma." So then he thought, "Oh, now I have to meditate or something, right?" So then he was sitting there. And then Don Tompa came again and said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Oh, I'm meditating." And then Don Tompa said, "Oh, very good, but better practice the Dharma." So then this person got a little bit kind of, "What?" So then he asked Don Tompa, "Sorry, what do you mean by practicing the Dharma?" And then Don Tompa said, "Give up this life." So that doesn't mean give up this life from the point of view showing the aspect of doing something, but it's a mental state of not getting attached to things in this life. That's what it means. Detach from the interest in this life. That's what it means. You can have a family, you can have a normal life, but your mental attitude can be completely in the Dharma. Yes, that's what it means. What it says here, the attraction to the appearance of this life is reversed. That's kind of if you study the Lam Rim, then in the small scope, when we try to generate interest in depression rebirth to obtain in a future state of existence, then we reverse interest in this life. So that doesn't mean give up your job and give up everything. No, it's a mental attitude. We are human beings. We have particular circumstances in life where we accept, but we just don't get attached to that. We use it as a vessel, so to say, to train our minds. So that's the real meaning of the appearance of this life is reversed. And that's true. If you contemplate death and impermanence often, then interest for fame, wealth, and problems we're facing, becomes much less, because you see the momentary changing nature of our existence. It can be over any moment. You lose all interest in these kind of worldly aspects of life that keeps you and be attached again and again and again. Yeah. So that's kind of how to reverse the life. Yeah. So it means that you generate a wish to have another again in order to achieve enlightenment or liberation. We like to acquire presumed rebirth in future lifetimes of existence, right? So then we practice morality, as you know, in accordance with law of cause and effect. Yeah. So yesterday we talked about law of cause and effect is not something the Buddha invented. Karma is not something magical, something like that. Yeah, karma is nothing else than the law of cause and effect within the continuity of a person, right? That's what it is. And so we have a seed, a plant, flowers. Yeah, so that means something grows, and potential. So our mind is very similar. We have countless potentials in our mind, and it just needs to be triggered, and one potential comes about. And we see that, when we sometimes in a happy mood, then it triggers all kind of positive things, When we sometimes a little bit down or wake up with the negative thoughts or something like that, then it triggers things. We keep our mind a little bit sad that day, you see. So that means that one state of consciousness can trigger all the moments of mind, and that's why we sometimes go into these kind of loops or kind of periods in life, right? So that it all has to do with stages in our mind, so potentials in our mind. So that means the more we develop our mind in the spiritual part, then the more of those positive potentials are being generated, and the more positive potentials you have, then for them to come to ripening becomes more potent, right? So that means that the more we generate positive potentials, the more that will come to ripening in the future. It's very scientific. You know, we talk in science, we talk about probabilities. That, you know, there's a lot of mystical. I mean, that's very similar. Like certain aspect of quantum mechanics, it looks spooky. That's what Einstein said. But in those, if you don't completely understand quantum mechanics, it's very spooky. But if you think about Bohm's interpretation and now also Carter-Rovelli interpretation of interdependence, it's not all that spooky, you know. And it's very similar to what we call the law of karma and cause and effect relationships, because we have all these potentials in our mind, right? And that gets triggered one day, and then something comes to ripening. So that's nothing else than karma. Yeah, and we can see in the pandemic that some people get COVID, some people don't, and maybe a few people exactly the same kind of circumstances, but just don't get it. And among the people who get it, there's those who get sick and those who don't get sick. And among those who get sick, there's those who die and those who don't die. So that depends on many causes and conditions, right? Yeah, so in our life, there's many aspects of causes and conditions all the time. And that's what we call this complex aspect of karma. I was a university student, got into spirituality a little bit, then also had these questions, you know, why are some people more suffering than others? You know, nothing is random. It's very difficult to say, yeah, because they're born there, but why is that so? Right? So in Buddhism, nothing is random. There should be kind of an explanation for things because of this cause and effect relationships. So then same for us, that sometimes we experience things in life and that is created, right? Nothing is random. So that means that everything is in this nature of cause and effect relationships. And also that proves that we can change. You know, we can eliminate negative thoughts. We can eliminate the seeds of the negative thoughts, and then we can go all the way up to liberation. That's what is the purpose of renunciation, is to have a wish for liberation. So that means that to go to a state of mind that is free of afflictions together with the seeds. Then it means, you know, we can change our mind, right? We can, if you practice patience, you can reduce anger to a certain extent. You know, maybe in the beginning, maybe it's kind of, you try to practice patience the best way you can, and you don't get angry for, more than an hour. Well, previously maybe a few hours, and then becomes like half an hour, and then a few years later, it becomes like 10 minutes, and a few years later, it becomes like a minute, then a few years later, it becomes like half a minute, right? So that means that over time, we can reduce these kind of destructive emotions, If we can over time reduce the destructive emotions, that's a proof that you can take them away. Yeah, so that means they become less and less severe, and then if you take away the roots, you can eliminate these destructive emotions. That's actually very important to know that we can do that, and that's what we call the truth of cessation. Right? So this kind of nirvana or liberation is kind of an ultimate form of cessation. Yeah. So here, what this first verse, just to summarize, talks about seeing we have this incredible potential. The Christian rebirth is not going to last forever because, that is certain. The time is uncertain. Sometimes we say that is definite. Right? The time is uncertain. And when we die, then only our mind is of help. So there's a lot of research being done regarding rebirth and incarnation in different fields of neuroscience, of near-death experience. There are states of consciousness without brain activity in the near-death experience. And it's very scientific because it's a very controlled environment. We have an operation theater, there's a person who has a cardiac arrest, there's an EEG, and we can measure what's going on. Right? So it's very interesting to see that people who come back to life after a cardiac arrest, some people talk about things they saw in that in-between, right? When there's no brain activity being measured. So we also say within 10, 20 seconds, oxygen flow to the brain stops, and the brain dies, right? But there is perception. That's been recorded quite well by different scientists. Pim van Lommel, for example, one of the leading persons from the Netherlands, a cardiologist, very interesting. Yeah, and Bruce Grayson, psychiatrist from Wisconsin University, the US, very hardcore kind of statistics proving that there is a state of consciousness without brain activity, and that state of consciousness perceives things that are valid. So it's very interesting. You know, so there is some consciousness without brain activity, or without physical brain. And then if you go a step further into the children remembering previous lifetime experience, Jim Tucker, one of the students of Professor Stevenson, yeah, so Jim Tucker, he wrote a few very interesting books about children remembering previous lifetimes. And also you can see on Netflix, you know, Surviving Death, it's called. It's very interesting documentary. So the documentaries, you can see they give a nice idea, but they don't give all the hardcore data. So that's, you can find in research. But it's very interesting to see that what Stevenson said when he was examining over 40 years, 2,000 cases of children remembering previous lifetimes, and not only remembering, but also with birthmarks. That means that there's a cause of death of the previous personality, and that leaves a kind of impression in the skin, in the present personality, you know. So it's scientifically is very strong. Yeah. And for us, what is very interesting in certain case studies is that people, they talk about things of the previous lifetime, and sometimes even habituation patterns of states of habituation of behavior is very similar in the previous lifetime and in the present. It's very interesting. For us, yeah, I also, we got all the case studies of Stevenson. It's very interesting. So that means that what Stevenson was saying is that there is something that carries information from a previous personality to the present. He didn't say anything about proving reincarnation, but that's what it is. And that's a very Buddhist approach, because the continuity of consciousness, that's what we talk about, right? So that means if you die, the most important thing is our mental development, because that we carry on. And that's why the Buddhist doctrine is very much into that aspect of generating our mind, developing our mind. Yeah, because that's the only thing that carries on. Our physical aspect of being an Olympic champion or something like that. Somehow maybe habituation in the mind, and maybe next lifetime again you're a good sprinter or something like that. The body you leave behind, right? So the body you don't take with you. Yeah. So that's kind of what it says here. The attraction to the appearance of this life is reversed. That means that you generate more interest in future states of existence. Yeah, so that's as far as quite important. In Buddhism, as we know, especially through principal aspect of the path, reincarnation is quite essential to be, you know, if you believe in it or not is a question, but you have to question it. It's very important to question. Does it exist? And if it exists, why does it exist? If it does not exist, or you think it does not exist, why doesn't it exist? It's very important to question. It's a lot of scientific research of what is the correlation between consciousness and brain. It's one aspect. And this children remembering previous lifetimes, I found it very, very interesting. Because when we were studying Brahmanavartika in the text on logic and reasoning, in the second chapter of the text, it talks about logical proof of the continuity of consciousness. Because consciousness is not matter, right? And consciousness can only be produced by consciousness itself. So that means that my thought right now is produced by a previous moment. And that previous moment is produced by its previous moment. And that previous moment is produced by its previous moment. We cannot really find the beginning of consciousness. So then we come to the conclusion of beginningless lifetime, which is a very difficult concept for many of us, but that with matter is very similar. You know, matter is also continuity. The Big Bang, as we call it, is actually more big bounce. Then actually the Big Bang is not really the start of the universe, because there was something before that created the Big Bang. You know, so it's a very similar process. Roger Penrose, as you know, he got the Nobel Prize for physics last year. And he talks about the same thing. He said, it's not really a big bang. It's kind of something created this big bang. And so it's more kind of a big bounce. So very interesting. So in matter also, there's no beginning to be found, so to say. So our continuity of consciousness is very similar. There's no beginning for consciousness and no end, in the sense that our consciousness will go all the way up to enlightenment. So the consciousness itself, it doesn't stop, but we can eliminate the contaminated aspect of it. So that's a few things to think about in relation with this verse, right? Attraction to the appearance of this life is reversed. So by thinking over and over again that actions and their effects are unbetraying, that's this law of cause and effect, that anger produces suffering, attachment, anxiety, fear, depression, that produces suffering, we can see it, right? So why is that? That's law of cause and effect. And that law of cause and effect we cannot change. But we can live in accordance with the law of cause and effect, meaning get rid of these negative thoughts. That we can do, because the negative thoughts are not an innate part of our mind, and the negative thoughts are temporary, and the negative thoughts are not considered reality. So there are different reasons to prove that negative thoughts can be taken away. They're not an innate part of our ultimate nature of the mind, so to say. Yeah, and they are not in accordance with reality. So with the correct form of consciousness, we can eliminate that, you know, and they momentarily changing. They come up by power of causes and conditions, abide and disintegrate. Yeah, so that means that there's many ways to prove that we can eliminate destructive emotions. Yeah? Yeah. So here it says, thinking over and over again that actions and their effects are betraying, meaning the law of cause and effect, you know, is there. Yeah, the fire is hot and burning. We cannot change that reality, but we can prevent our hand from putting it into the fire. Right? And so in a similar way, anger produces suffering. We cannot change that reality, but we can prevent anger from coming into being. You see that? And so that's kind of a law of cause and effect understanding, and live in accordance with that law. And in Tibetan language, we have a term that says Tendal Jik, means to organize dependent origination. That doesn't mean we can organize the interdependence between different events. We cannot organize that, but we can live in accordance with that law. Meaning, if you train your mind with generating more patience, you can eliminate anger, right? If you train your mind with more contentment, you can eliminate attachment. If you train your mind with understanding aspects of reality or positive thinking, you can get more rid of negative thoughts, right? So that means that these aspects of cause and effect relationship, we can live in accordance with that law of cause and effect relationships and change the mind in a particular direction. Yeah. So that when actions and their effects are unbetraying. So that means that if you have a pressure human rebirth, then you contemplate the impermanent nature of it, and then you see time is shorter, so then you want to do something about it, and then you train your mind, and then you create the right courses for similar conditions in the future by looking into karma, yeah, cause and effect relationships, and then you achieve another pressure rebirth in the future. Yeah. Then if you have the pressure rebirth again, then is it perfect or not? Yeah. Our human life, is it perfect or not? Sometimes perfect, sometimes not. Yeah. so that means that if you really look, you know, when you're born, you come out of the womb of the mother. You don't remember, but when you came out, at that time, you were not smiling, I think, and say, "Yeah, mom, hi, dad, here I am. I'm so happy to be here." You don't think like that, right? Yeah, so it's very shocking for a newborn coming out. We always think, oh, nice, cute, and this, that. But if you really examine well and see what's going on beneath the surface, then it's not all that kind of happiness there. You know? The child comes out and is kind of, you know, in all the light and all the eyes on you, and then you put on this kind of soft towel for us, but for them, if you're always surrounded by liquid, then you put all of a sudden on a cotton towel, it's slightly different feeling. Yeah. So you come out, and then you grow, as a young child. And there's certain aspects you can remember, right? Learning how to walk and then fall over and bump your head again. Then, then you want to go to the toilet, but you don't know how to do that. And then, it's then your parents have to clean. And, it's kind of quite some hassle involved. And then even more than that, you go up and then you want to study, but you don't really want to study. Then your friends will become enemies. And, it's kind of it's quite complicated sometimes. I remember when I was a teenager, maybe what is it, 14, 15, 16, you don't really know what you want to do in your life. You're a bit confused. I was also quite confused at the time. I remember, so then luckily I went to one place where I really got interested in study and it kept me going. But sometimes we have the spiritual life, and still you do some education, you thought, oh yeah, I'm going to do this and enjoy it, but then a few years down the line, your mind changes again. I remember I was studying hydrology, and in the beginning I was very into it, March and everything, and then I had one practical term. We have this practical term, you walk in office, do a project. And we had to write 2 reports after that. One is kind of a technical report about the research you did, and the other one is a personal one, how you experienced it. So I was already a little bit into spirituality at the time. And my title, I think, was Becoming Conscious. The title. I started to be more aware of things. Put a few question marks with this research done, and what's the purpose of this? What's the purpose of that? So then I went to my mentor, and he said, "Are you sure you want to proceed in this field?" It's very interesting. Yeah. So that means that when you're young, you have a lot of questions, doubts, and then you start working and you get a job you don't want to do, or you don't get a job you want to do, and it's a lot of complex things going on. Then, you have friends and girlfriend, boyfriends, and then relationships start and then they end, and it's kind of there's a lot of hassle involved, so to say, in life. So that means that things are not perfect. Yeah. So even if you have a question in rebirth, but you see things are not perfect. So then you contemplate the suffering of birth, sickness, aging, and death, for example, all things that come with life. So birth we talked about, sickness also happens, right? Mental or physical sickness happens to us without really wanting to get sick. So in Tibetan we say, Ledan Nyumun Shema Chen, means by the power of karma and afflictions. When we're sick, sometimes we say, I don't have time to be sick now. I want to be sick now, but it happens beyond our control, right? We cannot control that particular situation. So that's by the power of, if you don't have created a cause to get sick, you will never get sick. So that means in our continuity of consciousness, we have countless causes of different sicknesses and accidents, but it just needs to be triggered with some external conditions, and there we go. Yeah. So that means that there's a lot of hassles. Of birth we talked about, then growing up, and then then sickness happens. Mental, you're stuck somewhere, and then it's kind of it happens, right? So that means it happens beyond our control, and we don't really want this, but we cannot change it straight away. You see, so that's what is called by the power of karma and afflictions. So then, if you contemplate that, and then you see, okay, then also after that, we're getting older, and then we die, and that's it. Khatam, we say in Hindi. In India, we say Khatam, finished, bas. It means the end. So the end, my only friend. You know that song? I never look into your eyes again. It's still in my mind. When it comes to Dharma, it's all gone, but lyrics of different songs are still in my mind. Yeah. So that means then you die, and then the whole thing starts over again. So that means that if you contemplate these points, that's what it says here, and repeatedly contemplating the miseries of cyclic existence, attraction to the appearance of future lifetimes is reversed. So that means if you have a good human rebirth with all the kind of positive things that comes with it, which is good, spiritual practice, but it's not perfect yet. So that means that we still have all these problems of birth, sickness, aging, and death, and then meeting things you don't like to meet as a young teenager, or later on when you grow up, and having jobs, losing jobs, or having a house, losing house, having relationships, losing relationships. Then you have all this kind of hassles coming back and forth. Then you get older, and then when you get older, a few of you know, right? It's not only the gray hair. The gray hair is not really a problem. I also have quite a few already. The gray hair is not really the issue, you know? Unless you don't like to get gray, then of course it becomes a mental issue, right? But the gray hair by itself doesn't give you much suffering, you know, unless you mentally freak out about it and try to take out the hair or color it or whatever, and then you can stop it so it will come back. You know, don't have to worry. So that means that that aspect of old age is not really disturbing for some. Yeah, but you know, physically things are more difficult. Mentally, remembering things, and it's a lot of hassle involved in getting older and older and older. So that means that that's also not perfect. You know, of course, you can train your mind and keep your mind fresh the best way you can for a certain period of time, but it's not always the case. So that means that when you get older and older, that's, you know, that's kind of, things become more and more difficult. It's kind of down the hill instead of upwards. It's true, right? Yeah, so downhill is, yeah, it's true. Because if the mind gets more difficult physically, it gets more difficult. And you see an old lady who walks around the block sometimes with, how do you call this? Huh? Frame, or how do you call it? Frame, yeah. So she's walking, and it's very sad because she cannot walk without it. See, so that means physically things are getting more difficult. Yeah. So then you die, and then the whole thing starts over again. So that's what it says here. You know, repeatedly contemplating the miseries of cyclic existence. You know? So that means that if you really contemplate, then you can come to a conclusion. What is the essence of all this? What is the essence of existence? You know? So that's a kind of a question you ask, and then you can generate a kind of understanding or realization of, okay, as long as I have karma and afflictions, I have to undergo this. As long as I have karma and afflictions, I have to go undergo this again, again, again. And even if you talk with people who are not spiritual and they have some difficulties in life, and then when they die, and then you talk about different things, or before they die, sometime before they die, maybe, and you talk about these things, and then you talk about, you know, duty of consciousness or not, and if they're interested, sometimes they ask questions, and sometimes they make a comment, oh, I don't want to do this again. So some people, they understand the difficulty they went through, and they don't want to do that again. Mm-hmm. But if you understand samsara, that's what it means, right? It's kind of a cycle. As long as you have karma and afflictions, you will undergo the same types of difficulty again and again and again. And then you generate a kind of wish, oh, maybe I have to do something about this. You see? And that's what we call renunciation, a sense of a wish to get out of this cycle that goes towards the wish for liberation. So that means that if you see that the cause of all this is karma and afflictions. Okay. So the destructive emotions, as we saw yesterday evening, that destructive emotions, they cause a lot of suffering. And destructive emotions also activates our activities, physically or verbally. So that's karma means activity, right? Karma means activity. So that means by the power of these destructive emotions and afflictions, we create activity mentally, verbally, and physically. And some activity harms us, and some activities harms others as well. Verbal abuse or physical violence, right? Abuse, right? And mentally also, we do a lot of mental abuse with ourselves. So that means as long as you have karma and afflictions, there's a problem. So you want to do something about it. You want to solve that. You want to get rid of karma and afflictions. So that's the wish, right? That's the wish. The wish for renunciation, or the wish for achieving liberation. Yeah, so not wanting to experience the suffering again and again and again, and you generate a wish to take away the cause of suffering. Because if you take the cause away, the results will not come into being. So if you take away the cause, karma and afflictions, the results will not come. So then how do you do that? Take away cause of suffering, karma and afflictions, right? Then we see every affliction has its own antidote. Yeah? Practicing patience. If you contemplate the benefits of practicing patience, then, and the faults of contemplating anger, the faults of anger, then over time you might get convinced, oh, if I follow anger, that's not very constructive. If I generate more patience, it's more constructive. So you slowly start to shift your mind towards getting less angry. See? And with contentment, we do that versus attachment or strong desire. Yeah? Or think about other aspects, or impermanence can also help. Depends what kind of attachment or desire it is. If it's attachment or desire to getting more and more and wanting more wealth, wanting more fame, wanting more things, then contentment is a good antidote. But if there's other forms of attachment or desire, then sometimes impermanence can help a lot to counteract it. You know? Yeah, so there's a few antidotes for each and every individual kind of type of affliction. Yeah. And for the root of all this is ignorance, right? So if you take away ignorance, you take away the root of all afflictions. Meaning, yesterday we talked about that all these destructive emotions, like anger, attachment, jealousy, and pride, are rooted in the concept of I am I. Yeah, a very kind of ego kind of problem, yeah, or self-identity, or self-deceptive thought, sometimes we refer to. Meaning, there's always this strong I that comes up when we get angry, strong desire arises, also with fear, anxiety, depression, low self-esteem, shame. All those aspects are rooted in the very concrete I am I, you know, that appears. And that aspect is what we call the viewer's transitory collection, or this particular ignorance that causes all the destructive emotions to arise. So if you take away that ignorance, then you prevent affliction from coming into being. So that's kind of the way out. And the way out of that aspect we come later after the break is what we call emptiness, or empty of inherent existence. Nothing exists concrete from its own side. So we want to eliminate that concrete appearance. So I need this, I need that. How dare this person say this to me? I don't have any mistakes. Mistakes are with them, not with me. You know, so that means there's a very strong self-identity there. You know, so this self-identity, the question is, does it exist the way it appears? That's the question. So in the middling scope, we see if you take it away, then destructive emotions cannot come into being. If there's no destructive emotions, then there's no causes for suffering. If there's no cause for suffering, there's no suffering. So that means that if you understand ultimate reality, you take away this ignorance. If this ignorance be taken away, then these destructive emotions don't come up. If the destructive emotions don't come up, there is no suffering. When there is no suffering, there is happiness. Yeah, so that's why the Buddha said Nirvana is peace. Yeah, that means that if you achieve the state of Nirvana, a state of elimination of afflictions together with the seeds or their potentials, you achieve the state of what we call Nirvana. Yeah. So yeah, that may be enough for the first. Yeah, maybe we break a little bit, relax. Yeah. How long? 15 minutes? 15? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, 15 minutes break, and then we start quarter to, what is it? Quarter to 5, right? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Welcome back. Yeah. So yes, where are we? We are still in samsara, unfortunately. Yeah. So we on the way out, okay? So in samsara, but on the way out. Let's put it that way. Yeah. In that verse number 4, yeah, it talks about samsaric suffering. So it's true, right? And one day, one point of view, what we talked about yesterday about acceptance a little bit, it's true also within samsara. It's heavy material sometimes to contemplate, but you know, it's kind of okay. We in it, so There's not too much to worry about it more than, you know, but at least we can do something about it. That's the thing. If you have a problem in life and you cannot solve it, then worrying about it also doesn't really help. You know, as Deva says, and Jonas also often quotes that. You know, if you have a problem in life and you cannot solve it, then there's no point in worrying about it because you cannot solve it. If you have a problem in life and you can solve it, then also there's no point worrying about it because you can solve it, right? So that gives a lot of peace of mind, you know. Yeah. So that means, yeah, sometimes we're sick, sometimes it happens, but there's nothing to worry about because that's the nature of our existence. Yeah, yesterday we talked about this aspect of acceptance when you're sick or when you're down, or negative thoughts come to mind. That's the nature of reality. So that's how it is. And then I said, you know, I talk to myself sometimes, and I cheer myself up. Some people think I'm crazy, even Fabienne, maybe, I don't know if she can hear me sometimes, but it's very interesting because when I was a teenager, I was very uptight. And when I was fixing my bike or something, then I got really annoyed when it didn't go the right way I wanted to. And then I had the tools and yeah, so it didn't benefit. And now when I do things and sometimes doesn't really go well, then I try to laugh about it. But yeah, it doesn't always work, especially with computers. I still have difficulty. Yeah, but yeah, sometimes it's quite interesting to see how to react. One of my friends in the Netherlands, we started Buddhism at the same time, 1993. He was also a very uptight person, he told me, especially in traffic. And you know, in Netherlands, same as the UK, is a lot of sophisticated kind of management of traffic in and out of the city. I don't know actually in London, but maybe they do, I'm not sure. But in Netherlands, Amsterdam, they have this kind of, in the morning, there's more lanes inside the city than out. And in the evening, they switch it over. So that prevents traffic jams. But then in winter, there's still traffic jams, of course. You know, and then he used to get so angry and he was just shouting behind the steering wheel, the person in front. Yeah. But the person in front, windows closed, heater on, listening to some music, no disturbance. So he only had himself, right? So he said over years, I met him again, I think 10 years after or something, and he said, no, I just laughed about it. It's very interesting, you know, because if you do it in that way, you have a problem, you cannot solve it anyway at that particular time, then there's no point in getting uptight about it because that makes it even worse, right? It's, with samsaric suffering, same thing. And I've seen many of my own teachers showing the aspect of getting old and things are difficult, and then ooh, they just laugh about it that things are difficult. Yeah. So that's much better than getting depressed about it and negative, you know, because then on top of the physical pain, you create a lot of mental suffering. That can be prevented. So I learned so much seeing a few of just in our eyes ordinary monks, but when they're old, you know, they show the aspect of things are difficult, but then oops, I cannot stand anymore. Something like that. They just laugh about it, right? So that means at least they have a kind of uh, acceptance there, and there's no disturbance of mind, although physically it's a bit difficult sometimes. So that helps a lot. Yeah, so we can prevent a lot of mental difficulty to try to not worry too much about things, and it's easier to say than do, but over time we can train our mind, right, in those things. Yeah? So this only says with old age, for example, same thing. If you worrying about it, then it doesn't stop the process, right? We cannot stop the process. So if you accept it and then don't worry about it too much, that's the nature of reality, you know. So that helps quite a bit. And then especially when you think about samsara and you put it in the whole frame of again and again experiencing these things, then it's not a big deal to die, for example, because we did so many times before. It's kind of changing the guest house that it is. Yeah? So many old masters, when they reach an elder age and things are difficult, and then they say, "Oh, it's time to get a new body." Yeah. So then they show the aspect of passing away and a new body. You see, that is very interesting. Yeah. And some of the masters are very inspiring. They die according to the book. You know, it's very interesting to see that. Yeah, complete control. So that means that for us, when we in samsara, as we talked about the different types of suffering, we generate a wish to get out of it. That's the first step. Yeah, so we generate a wish by contemplating the suffering of birth, sickness, aging, and death, and undergoing these aspects again and again and again, as well as all the mental difficulties that comes along with it. Then, when we're really convinced about the difficulties, then we generate a wish not to experience that in the future, right? So that's kind of the wish of renunciation. Then we wish liberation or states beyond all forms of suffering, yeah, or nirvana, as we call it, or liberation. And then we look for methods to eliminate the causes for suffering. Yeah, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about with the view of reality, understanding emptiness. Because this ignorance is created by this idea of an I to exist from some side. So by understanding emptiness, emptiness means empty of something. It's not nothingness, right? So emptiness means empty of inherent existence, empty of this I that appears. So if you realize the I is not really there the way it appears, then over time you refine that more and more. Then you realize emptiness one day, and then you're gonna stop this cycle because you're gonna stop ignorance from coming into being. If ignorance doesn't come into being, there's no afflictions. If there's no afflictions, there's no cause for suffering. See that? Yeah. So that's kind of how we get out of samsara. So then in verse number 5, it says, when by having trained in that way, there is no arising, even for a second, of attractions to the perfections of psychic existence. So that means if you contemplate these points of samsaric suffering again and again and again, you generate a wish to be free of it, right? And so same, if we have a problem in life or a particular thought pattern, that's a problem, or a particular destructive emotion, that is a problem. We contemplate the faults of that problem, and we contemplate the benefits of being free of that problem. Yeah, so then the more you are convinced about that issue, the mind shifts. Same with the addiction. People who have an addiction, then if you contemplate the faults of the addictions more and more, and the benefits of the addiction to be, oh, sorry, the benefits of to be free of the addiction, right? Then the more you do that, the more you start to be convinced of doing something about it. Yeah, that's a yeah, that's a very interesting process, because the power of the mind is beyond imagination. You know, so it is possible to shift the mind in a particular direction by contemplating the faults of a problem and the benefits of getting rid of the problem, or the methodology of getting rid of the problem. So the more you get convinced, the more you get interest in solving the problem. You see, so that's what it is. In the teachings, when we talk about generating effort and eliminating laziness of not wanting to engage in a particular direction, that's what this laziness doesn't mean just being asleep all the time, right? So laziness is kind of not wanting to change, not wanting to change the mind in something positive. Yeah, that's kind of an aspect of laziness. So that aspect can only be tackled if you try to be convinced about the benefits of a spiritual path, the benefits of changing your mind, for example. The more you're convinced about that, the more you generate an interest in that direction. Yeah, so that's kind of very important to contemplate. So all our meditation on the Lamrim is very similar, right? We analyze the benefits of contemplating this in the particular way, and then the drawbacks of not doing so, yeah? And then the mind shifts in a particular direction. So that's how our mind functions, you know? When we're convinced about something, same with business deals, same thing, or decisions in life. When we have to make a decision in life, we see, oh, what are the pros and cons of this decision, and then we take a kind of final kind of decision, right? So here, same thing. Lamrim, we contemplate those two aspects again and again. Yeah. So we generate a kind of renunciation after contemplating the suffering of samsara and see how it is being caused. And then when it says, if you have done that for a bit longer than just 3 hours or 2 hours, something like that, then if you do it over a long period of time, you probably will generate a wish that day and night you want to be free. And even in your dreams, you think about the drawbacks of samsara and want to be free. So without effort, when that mind comes, day and night, even if you have your favorite ice cream or your favorite pasta or pizza or dal, yeah, or food, whatever you like, you know. So, or the beautiful day trip, whatever, you know, if you, whatever you do in daily life that makes you like happy, of course, you can enjoy that, right? You should enjoy that, but the attachment to that is a different thing. Thinking that's the cause for happiness is maybe not completely reality. It's a temporary happiness, right? Yeah. So that means whatever you do, you see that it's all transient, and then you see it's all kind of impermanent, and so then you start to understand a little bit more about suffering of samsara. And when it's kind of spontaneous in that way, then it says when you all day and night have the intention to seek liberation, when that arises, then that's a sign of having generated the thought of renunciation that has been generated. Yeah, it says in verse number 5. So you can see it talks about the needs to generate renunciation, because without renunciation, you will never generate the wish to be free. Yeah. And then how you generate renunciation? By contemplating the sufferings of birth, sickness, aging, and death, and meeting things you don't like to meet, and kasa, not yeah, meeting things you don't like to meet, and not meeting things you like to meet, and never being satisfied. Yeah, I can get no satisfaction is one, and I haven't found what I'm looking for is another one. And so that means those aspects of samsaric suffering, you see there's no real essence in all of this. You know, so then, and that means that there's no essence when you're facing a problem one day. That's not a real renunciation, right? So when we have a problem in life and we want to solve the problem and try to avoid that problem, that's not real renunciation. Renunciation should be based upon how is that problem created. It's created by cause and effect. And what is the cause and effect? Karma and afflictions. So that insight should be there, right? Yeah. And then the suffering of suffering is not that difficult to recognize. All of us can recognize negative thoughts or disturbance of mind or physical difficulty is very easy to recognize. That's not really when the Buddha said you should know suffering. That's not what the Buddha said. Or the suffering of change. You know, when you're hungry, you eat, and then you eat too much, and then there's another suffering there. Yeah. Or, you know, so that means when when you want to do some exercise and you walk all the way to Battersea Park and back from here, it's quite far, then the next day you're tired. Yeah, so that's kind of the suffering of change. You know, that means it's kind of it's change, it changes into suffering, you know. So that's also quite easy to recognize. But the real suffering we're talking about is the all pervasive compounding form of suffering. That means that as long as you have karma and afflictions, as long as you have karma and afflictions, you have suffering. Only the surface is always there. So temporarily we're quite okay, but we don't know when we're gonna get sick. And why do we get sick? Because of an external condition, of course, but also of the internal kind of potentials, right? Internal causes. Yeah. So by understanding that you can get sick any moment and you can suffer any moment because of having karma and afflictions. Yeah. So that's the real insight into what is suffering is all about. When the Buddha said you should know suffering, he talked about this aspect, right? Yeah. Yeah. So then if you really day and night see that aspect and you want to be free of it, and you don't want all the hassle anymore of samsaric suffering, and then day and night you want to leave it behind, then you have generated renunciation, as said in verse number 5. Yeah. Yeah. But that's up to here is kind of the first principal aspect of the path, renunciation. Yeah, we know even if you want to generate the next one, bodhicitta, without renunciation, you can never generate bodhicitta. So you can imagine the more understanding of suffering you have yourself, the more uh, compassion you will generate for others. And here, same thing. If you see others suffering in physically, right, or mentally, we see that, then we generate a kind of compassion. Yeah, but actually, we should generate compassion for all beings, in the sense if they're sick or not sick, if they're happy or not happy. Because all sentient beings have underneath the surface this kind of karma and affliction. So temporarily they might be quite okay, but over time that doesn't pervade. right? So that's kind of this unstable aspect of samsara because of having karma and afflictions, having these destructive emotions and the activities of these destructive emotions. So that means that can become a disaster for all beings who have these kind of states of mind. So temporarily they might be okay, but on the long term, maybe not. Yeah, so that's the real understanding when we generate compassion, is also based on this all-pervasive compounding form of suffering. Yeah. So yeah, so then we go to the outline of the text, and there it says, the purpose, why do we generate, or why do we need to generate a mind of enlightenment? Because even if you, renunciation has been developed in the previous, if you do not possess the mind of enlightenment, it does not become the cause for the perfect bliss of unsurpassable enlightenment. Yeah, you cannot achieve enlightenment by only renunciation. So there it says here, therefore, the wise generate the supreme mind of enlightenment. Yeah. So yeah, that's this. But you can also think about, you know, you just one, we just one person, right? Although we think our problem is the worst problem in the whole universe, and nobody suffers as much as we do. Yeah, but actually, all of us have exactly the same wish: wanting happiness, not wanting suffering. You know. And then we think, oh, we always suffering and other people are always so happy. But then when you meet other people from the outside, first time you see a person, oh, you think, oh, this person is quite happy. But then when you meet that person and you talk to a person, you just have to talk for 10, 15 minutes, and then you see they also have problems. Yeah. So we sometimes think we're the only one who has problems, you know, even, in monasteries and nunneries, they think, oh, they have so easy life, they must be so happy, and this, that, and but there's also problems everywhere, right? So there's no escape. As long as you have karma and afflictions, then there's no escape. So that means that, we have the same problem we have. People around us have very similar things, or even worse. So then it brings you out of the box, that seeing that other people are actually more suffering than us. And they have exactly the same wish, wanting happiness and not wanting suffering. Equal in strength as we have. Exactly the same. When we have a little bit of difficulty in life, we want to get rid of it as soon as possible, right? We have a little bit of happiness, want to keep it, you know? And then that exists in all of us, exactly in the same strength, spontaneous, you know? So then you start to see, okay, if that's the case, then two are already more than one. And two others more than one, right? Three more, four, then 100,000, million, billion. So then you think about, oh, if you work for the benefit of more in number, this may be more beneficial than just oneself. And then the mind shifts into the need of generating in the mind of enlightenment. Right? Okay. So that's kind of, therefore, the wise generate the supreme mind of enlightenment. Because if you only work for the benefit of your own purpose of ultimate happiness, then when that's being accomplished, then that's done. But then others are still in the same situation you were before, right? So if you work for the benefit of more in number, then this is actually, on the long term, there's more benefit, because it creates more causes for happiness than just one individual, yourself. So that's kind of, and that we talked about yesterday a little bit, the benefits of compassion, because then the self-cherishing attitude goes down the drain, because that's the cause for many types of suffering. If we have a problem, then okay, the self-pity and oh, always me. So then it's kind of there's a kind of a building suffering on top of suffering. So the self-cherishing attitude actually also creates a kind of suffering itself. It gives this narrow-minded aspect. Right. So that's when you generate a wish for others, the mind goes like fast. And when the mind goes vast, then little problems they don't appear as big anymore. You know, so that means that if you understand and work for the benefit of others, then you start forgetting your own problems, right? And then your own problems, which before made you very unhappy, now that aspect is completely transformed because you think about others more than yourself. Yeah, so that's a kind of many angles or reasons why to generate the mind of enlightenment. Yeah, we talk about many benefits of compassion training and no post-traumatic stress disorders by people who train their mind in these things and been tortured to death for decades, almost. And then surviving that, and then physically they're broken, but mentally they're very strong. There's no post-traumatic stress disorder. Yeah, so it's very interesting, and that's scientifically researched. It's very interesting. That the power of compassion is mind-boggling. So yeah, so that's many benefits of generating it, and the need also, right? That how wonderful to be if you can really work for the benefit of others. So that's, yeah, it's kind of very precious. Yeah. So then, how to generate the mind of enlightenment? You hear that one? You hear? Yeah. He is kind of yeah. So that person also thinks, that person thinks, we have one here. It comes off. There's a few. I more or less know where. Yeah. So when they're on the bike, they think everybody likes this, because they like it, right? So this kind of the attachment that I do a little bit more because everybody likes this. But that's maybe not always true. Yeah. Yeah, I noticed in London actually there's more. Anyway, maybe just in the West. Because, they're quite loud, some of them. Yeah, yeah. But they also want happiness, right? But they just stuck in this concept that the bike is giving their the happiness, and temporarily it's a little bit there, but it doesn't give the ultimate one, because there's probably a bike next to them who's a little bit more louder, a bit faster. Yeah. Okay, so then the need to generate the mind of enlightenment, right? The purpose we talked about, the need to generate compassion, so to say. Then how do we do that? How do we generate it? That's been explained in verse number 7 and 8, That's swept away by the currents of the four powerful rivers. And we just talked about the four types of suffering of birth, sickness, aging, and death. And so this kind of, you can imagine, not a nice creek, but this kind of, you see sometimes when there's heavy rain in certain areas, they have these currents, right? Mud, everything is being taken down, houses, everything. So you think about a current like that, a powerful river. So tied by the bounds of karma, so hard to undo. So if there's a person in that river swept away, by these currents of birth, sickness, aging, and death, and then, the hands and the feet are tied up, bound by the ropes of karma and afflictions. So that means that they in this current, if they don't have this, they can still maybe try to swim to the side. But if you like this, bound by with the ropes of karma and affliction, then there's no way you can escape. You see that? It's very interesting analogy. So that means that if you're in this current, or the beings in this case, and the hands and feet are tied up, they cannot escape. So that means that as long as you have karma and afflictions, you cannot escape the suffering of birth, sickness, aging, and death. You see that? So you have to undo the bounds of karma and afflictions. That's what it says. So this verse can be used to generate renunciation as well as generate compassion. Yeah, first you generate renunciation, and then you generate compassion for others. So you see beings are just going around in these powerful rivers. So that doesn't mean when we don't see the suffering of suffering, but it's happening all the time, right? People are born, they're having sickness, they're having old age problems, then they die. So that goes again and again and again in a continuous kind of circle, right? Yeah. So as long as they have this karma and afflictions, then they cannot escape that circle. You see that? So hard to undo, because it's not easy to train the mind. We know that from our own experience, right? To train our mind is not easy. It doesn't come from one day to the next. Yeah. So if you think about other beings, then it helps us to generate compassion. That it's not that easy for them to get out of it, because these ropes are very tight, are very difficult to undo. But that's not everything. Then, even if you loosen them a little bit, you know, if you train your mind a little bit, or beings train their mind a little bit, they get a little bit in control over their mind. But still, they're caught in the iron net of self-grasping. So that means that if you're in an iron cage inside the river, then there's no escape, right? The cage is just taken away by this current of birth, sickness, aging, and death. But if the self-grasping is there, means this ignorance, then although you release a little bit, but still you're stuck. Because this ignorance or this self-grasping, yeah, self-grasping refers to a grasping at itself. And what kind of self is self that seems to exist from its own side, this I. You know, when you get angry or strong desire arises or fear or something like that, it's a very strong I that arises, right? So that I, we grasp at that. And then, yeah, it's very interesting to see different examples of how we grasp at an I. And then you see how afflictions arise. Yeah, so very easy to relate to is you buy 4 identical mobile phones with 4 friends at the same time. You sit in a nice terrace and then you have a nice thing to drink. And then the waitress comes and drops over and comes, whoops, and then there goes the table and all the 4 phones fall on the floor. And they're completely identical, you know, because you bought them with your friends just before having a drink there. And then one of the 4 phones broke in the fall. Then the first moment that comes to mind, I hope it's not mine, right? So then when it's one of the other person's phones, you feel a little bit relieved, you know. You can see that this I created a kind of attachment, first of all, to your particular phone. It is merely imputed because the phones are identical, right? Yeah, so because this one is connected with you is merely imputed, right? Yeah. So then you see this as very concrete, and then you think, oh, I hope it's not mine. And when it's yours, you get irritated. You see? So based on this concept of I and my phone. So that means that there's a correlation between the concrete self, and that's the self-grasping, and that leads to possessive aspects as well, my phone. Yeah, so that means that if you have, as long as you have this self-grasping, you will create suffering again and again and again. And so, yeah, yeah, phones is a very good example because that's what people, in the text we don't talk about phones. In the text it talks about pots and pillars and completely different, right? But yeah, I found very striking when one Apple phone came out. They're very expensive, and I think it was Apple 4 or something. Was in a newspaper that in China one shop supposed to be opening at 9 o'clock in the morning, and there was a lot of people queuing up to get this new iPhone 4 because that was one of the first shops you get it, and if you get it the first time, it makes you happy. You see, so they were lining up there to get this phone, and then the shop didn't open at 9 o'clock, so people get really annoyed. So at first you see there's this attachment. I want my iPhone, right? You want the iPhone. So then there's this attachment. There's probably, I don't know, I stand for information maybe or not. iPad, iPhone, yeah. Well, not, it doesn't just say I, right? It's, I know why they call it like that, but it's very interesting. So I want my iPhone. There's attachment there, right? Yeah, the people want to go to the shop, get it. Then the shopkeeper didn't open the shop. So they're throwing stones at the windows of the shop because they separated from the object of attachment, and that causes kind of aversion, you see? So you can see both aspects are related with the concept of I, and a very solid one. Yeah? So this kind of this self-grasping. Yeah. So this self-grasping is this net, iron net. So as long, even though you practice a little bit of patience and contentment, so you be able to cope quite okay in life with afflictions, right? But as long as you have this self-grasping, yeah, you're still in this iron net of you cannot escape. So that means as long as you have self-grasping, then you still produce again afflictions. Yeah? Yeah. So that's what it says here: caught in the iron net of self-grasping, completely involved by the darkness of ignorance, not understanding reality. Because if you don't understand reality, you will never be able to eliminate ignorance. And so we have to train in the mind realizing emptiness, or the mind understanding reality. Yeah. So there's the darkness. So you can imagine there's a river, those kind of mud streams, very, you know, very heavy, take down houses, you know, kind of very powerful streams. And then there's beings in there who are bound by karma and affliction, right? Tied with ropes, again, to escape. And then there's an iron net of self-grasping, or an iron cage they cannot escape. And then it's completely dark, so they cannot really know how to get out. You see? So not knowing how to get out means if you don't understand reality, you don't know how to get rid of self-grasping. If you don't know how to get rid of self-grasping, you don't know how to get rid of afflictions. You see that? Yeah, so that's it's a that verse is very powerful. His Holiness Dalai Lama says he uses this verse also to generate renunciation. You know, so both can be done with this verse. You know, yeah. So here it's referring to yeah, to sentient beings in the sense of generating great compassion for them. It's very powerful because you see that beings are born and suffering because of this self-grasping. And if you understand reality a little bit, you see there's an end to that. You can eliminate self-grasping. Yeah, so that's why it only says emptiness is not easy to be understood, but it's quite essential, as you see here also and before. Yeah. The total darkness of ignorance. Endlessly reborn in cyclic existence, ceaselessly tormented by the three types of suffering. We talked about suffering of suffering, like a headache or being down, right? Depressed, it's kind of the suffering of suffering. Then we also have the suffering of change. Yeah, when you're hungry, you eat and you eat too much, then you, yeah. Like in Europe, most places we eat quite early, but like in Spain and in India, we have quite late dinners, sometimes 9 o'clock something. And some of the dinners are quite heavy. So then when you're very hungry because it's late, so you're hungry too in the afternoon, then you're so hungry, and then you eat quite late, and then you eat too much. And then it's 9, 10, and you go to bed, and then you wake up in the morning, and the mind is kind of not really clear. Yeah. So that means that the taking away the suffering of hunger by eating too much causes actually the suffering of change, right? Yeah. And then we have the all pervasive compounding form of suffering, in the sense that as long as we have karma and afflictions, then we still have to suffer. Yeah. So that's the real suffering to be understood. Yeah. So the three types of suffering: suffering of suffering, suffering of change, and the all pervasive compounding form of suffering. So thinking that all mothers, so that means that all sentient beings, basically, once they have been our mother, or have been our father, or have been a person who took care of us, right? Because as a newborn baby, you cannot survive all by yourself. You have to depend on others. Yes, that's what it says here. So thinking that all beings will be so kind to you, and also in daily life, we depend constantly on the kindness of others. Even just doing our shopping or online, and people deliver it for you. It's kind of, you pay for it, but still, we are interconnected with countless beings, and everybody's so kind to help and put their kind of aspects to the whole cycle, or the whole wholeness, right? So by reflecting on the kindness of others, then seeing they are in this condition of the four current rivers tied by karma and afflictions, so hard to undo, and in iron net of self-grasping, in darkness of ignorance. So then you can generate a kind of wish for them to be free of suffering, right? Yeah. So that wish for them to be free of suffering, we call compassion. Yeah. And we started with today that bodhicitta, one of the aspiration is compassion, right? One of the aspirations is compassion. So if you have really contemplated this well, and you really generate a wish for others to be free of suffering, day and night, yeah, then the next point will come, what do I have to do to accomplish this wish? Yeah? Do you have the capacity right now to do that or not? And then you see, you have to get some realizations. You have to get clairvoyance, for example. Without clairvoyance, it's very difficult to help others. Without knowing other people's mind and knowing what's the best for others. Yeah, like normally, if a person has a problem, you have to ask a lot of questions. Oh, what is wrong, and how is it caused, and how is this, how is that? You need so many questions to be asked. But if you have clairvoyance, you know exactly, okay, this is the person, this is the problem, right? You know this straight away. So then you can help so much more. So we need this kind of all-knowing mind of a Buddha in order to be real benefit of others. So that's the second aspiration. In order to help others to the full extent, I have to become a Buddha. So then we have this kind of aspiration. So then the two aspirations come into being. One, wanting sentient beings free of suffering, as we just discussed. And the other one, I have to become a Buddha in order to accomplish that aim of liberating them. So then these two aspirations, they produce what we call bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment. Yeah? So when you contemplate this day and night, then it says that at one point of time you generate this bodhicitta. So bodhicitta doesn't happen also from within a few years, right? It's kind of, you have to meditate very intensively over long periods of time. Yeah, if you read, for example, biographies of the masters like His Holiness Dalai Lama's previous emanations at the time of Don Tompa, Watisha, and there's a very interesting biographies of the lives of the previous lineages of Don Tompa. Very interesting in the book of the Kadam, if you read that the previous manifestations, they sometimes meditate on bodhicitta for decades in retreat, to make it stronger and stronger and stronger and to generate this realization. So it doesn't come that easily, probably, but every effort that is produced in that way produces potentials for it to make it spontaneous, right? Yeah. So that means the more and more you contemplate these points, then it can become a kind of a generation. Yes, it says in the next aspect, verse 8a is called in this text. In short, it says, like the mother whose cherished son or daughter has fallen into a pit of fire, or falling off a cliff, will experience even 1 second of the suffering. As it's true, right? If you take care of children, you know that feeling. When something is wrong with your child, you feel very, very strong connection. So when it's the child of the neighbors, that connection is not that strong. Yeah. So the Buddha has the feeling of want to take care even stronger than the mother for a child, right? And so it's very strong. Yeah. So, but here it puts as an example. Yeah. So then the suffering is unbearable to see, and then your reflection on the suffering of all modern sentient beings has made it impossible for you to bear even their suffering for a second. You're not comfortable anymore. You want to do something. And that's compassion. Compassion is a mind that understands the suffering of others and wants to act and do something. It's a very constructive way of mind. So it goes beyond pity. It really understands the issue and knows how to help beings. Right? So compassion is a very constructive form of mind. And then wish to seek enlightenment for the sake of, meaning that if you see you don't have the capacity right now to do things, so you need to accomplish the state of enlightenment for that purpose. You need the qualities of enlightened being. So that's one. That's that aspiration of the result, right? Yeah. But that comes without effort, day and night. Day and night. Even if a person, even your worst enemy in life, even towards them. Yeah, so that means we often say, oh, may all sentient beings become enlightened as quickly as possible, except this one, except that one. We try to exclude people, right? People who are not nice to us. But you shouldn't do that. That's because then you're lacking this equanimity. You should have the wish for all beings without exception. Yeah, when it's spontaneous like that, then the precious mind of enlightenment is being generated. Yeah, so that means over, what his Holiness says, decades or lifetimes. So, yeah, that's what it is. Yeah. Yeah. When someone was asked in one of the science conferences or dialogues, how long are you studying these matters? Because his Holiness is asking all kind of in-depth questions. And then his Holiness said to the scientist, oh, for the last 14 lifetimes. So then silent, what? Yeah, it was a joke, but it's a Buddhist joke, so some non-Buddhists it's a bit difficult to relate to. Yeah, we have a lot of Buddhist jokes, which sometimes for lay people, in sense, lay to spirituality. Yeah, it's sometimes difficult. Let me just joke about that in Burmese. Okay, don't die. See you next week. Don't die. Okay. Some people find what? Yeah, but in the Buddhist kind of conversation is kind of normal, right? We talk about those things like that. Yeah. Anyway, so that means that if you generate this mind, and that mind is kind of there without efforts, then then you generate bodhicitta. So this is verse 8a. Yeah. Yeah, so that's bodhicitta. Yeah, so bodhicitta is a mind, a main mind that has these two aspirations, wanting sentient beings to be free of suffering and want to accomplish enlightenment for that purpose. And so that's how we normally define bodhicitta, two aspirations. Yeah. So then, bodhicitta, is that enough? Can you with one wing fly? So bodhicitta is not enough because you need to eliminate ignorance still. And ignorance can only be eliminated, as we saw, with emptiness, understanding reality. So we need emptiness for the purpose. So that's what it says in verse number 9. Without the wisdom realizing ultimate reality, even though you have generated renunciation and the mind of enlightenment, you cannot cut the root of cyclic existence. Therefore, attempt the method to realize dependent origination. So here, very interesting, that Lama Tsongkhapa says dependent origination. It doesn't say emptiness. So very interesting. That means that because by the power of dependent origination or dependent arising, translated here, you can establish ultimate reality of emptiness. So it's the tool, right? That's why it says here, attempt the method for realize dependent arising. Yeah. So that means that we have this self-grasping, or we have this I that exists or seems to exist, very solid from its own side, you know. So, but is that really there or not? That's the question. You know, if you get angry, or strong desire comes up, or fear, or low self-esteem, or depression, or then it's not that strong sometimes. But when afflictions come up, it's a bit stronger and clearer, I should say, a bit more clear. The clue is to see it as a separate appearance, right? Because things are in our mind very mixed up. You know, sometimes things are mixed up with anger, things are mixed up with attachment, or so we have to be very neutral and have a kind of pure observance of how does this I appear, and don't get involved in the emotions aspect. Just see how the I appears. You know? So when you get criticized, it's a very good one. And somebody points out your mistakes, it's very healthy, you know, because you learn so much. One day, when people point out your mistakes, you actually should thank them instead of scolding them. Often we scold them. Not true, not true. I don't have any mistakes like that. Or yeah, maybe it's a, you know, a misunderstanding. But sometimes people tell us things we don't like to hear, especially about maybe things we didn't do correctly, something like that. You know, so that boosts, that gives a kind of very interesting reaction because we say I, you know, so it's related with this I again. See, so that means that a person who criticizes us is actually very kind because we can practice patience with them. We see our own faults so we can improve. And this most important benefit, in order to generate the right view, we have to understand how does I appear. Yeah, so that means that you have to get a clear picture of how does I appear. So a person criticizing you is actually very, very kind. So you say, thank you, Lasso. Thank you. Yeah. And then just slowly walk away, avoiding more kind of hardships in conversation. But you know, if the person is really annoyed, then maybe not the right time to argue. So you say, okay, yeah, sorry, yeah, thank you. Yeah. And then you walk away and then see how the eye appears. Very interesting. So that means that that's very important. Otherwise, you don't know really what is empty of what. Because when we talk about emptiness, we talk about empty of something. And it means empty of this I, concrete I. And that we prove with dependent origination, dependent arising. Because our body and mind is in this nature of dependent arising, right? We put in food, something comes out, we think, we breathe, we pump the blood around in our body. Yeah? Our mind thinks about things, and we listen, and then we think about, we write things down, and we see things. So that means that it's a process of body and mind, of cause and effect relationships all the time, you know, and individual parts and collection of different parts of the body, individual parts of the mind, so the different 5 types of consciousnesses, sensory perception, mental consciousness, different moments. Yeah, so there is not really a concrete I to be found in this process of the body, or in our mind, you know. So that means that, or separate from the body and mind. You know? If you see this I that appears when somebody criticizes you, or when affliction comes up, you then see, where is this I? Where is this Tenzin Namdak? You know? So then you check in your body, and you check in your mind, and actually, in a process of dependence, there's nothing really something to exist all by itself. You know? So you can actually find something like that. So that's what it talks about, how the way of try to understand what is this emptiness by the power of dependent origination. So dependent arising is a reason to prove that there is no concrete reality as such. There is no inherent reality as such. Nothing exists from its own side. Everything is interdependent. That's why we talk about dependent origination proving. Yeah. So then it says, showing the right view, it says, one who sees the cause and effect of all phenomena, yeah, of both cyclic existence and the state beyond sorrow, or Nirvana, as forever unbetraying. Meaning, if you really understand nothing exists from its own side, it should imply that everything is there by causes and conditions, right? Yeah, in quantum mechanics is very similar. You know, it's a process, they say. You know, what you examine, the correlation between individual particles is of more importance than the individual particles themselves. So it's very similar. In quantum mechanics, they come to very similar conclusions, that what it talks about here, that everything is just cause and effect relationships. There's nothing that exists from its own side. You see? Yeah. So then, and for who any object trusting in by the grasping mind has completely disappeared. Yeah, so that means as that time entering the path of pleasing the Buddhas. The Buddhas are very happy when you have this reached, meaning that if you contemplate emptiness well, then it should enhance the understanding of emptiness. And it should enhance the understanding of cause and effect relationships. If you contemplate emptiness and think, oh, nothing exists at all, then you're not pleasing the Buddhas, because then the Buddhas say, look, you go the wrong direction, don't do that. So that means if you study dependent origination, it helps you to not fall into the extremes of nihilism or eternalism. Meaning, if you understand dependent origination, you see nothing can exist from its own side. So you don't fall to an extreme of eternalism. Right? And you also see that on a conventional level, there's a body and a mind. So you don't fall into the extreme of nihilism, that nothing exists at all. So we say in Tibetan, Tenjun, Tenajuma, Tenjaljuma sometimes also. So in translation, we mostly say dependent arising or dependent origination. There's two terms, right? So dependent means things are interconnected. Nothing exists from its own side. So by understanding dependent, we don't fall into the extreme of this eternalism that everything exists from its own side. Yeah? So dependence breaks that wrong view. Yeah? Then if you come to that view that nothing exists concrete from its own side because everything is dependent, then the next term, origination, or arisen, sometimes they translate, that helps us not to fall into the extreme of nihilism. Because on a conventional level, there's a body and a mind that comes into being, right? And so on a conventional level, things come and go. So that means there is a reality there. So the term dependent origination helps us not to fall into the two extremes of thinking things exist from their own side, which is not true, or nothing exists at all, which is also not true. See that? So dependent origination helps us to have what we call the middle way. Yeah, don't fall into either of the two extremes. That's why the dependent origination is a very important aspect of the reasoning, and that's also why Lama Tsongkhapa put dependent origination here. Then also when Lama Tsongkhapa realized emptiness in Olga, one place in Tibet where he did retreat for a few years, then also when he realized emptiness, the first thing he wrote was in praise of dependent origination. Right? That's the praise of Buddha Sakyamuni in relation with the teaching on dependent origination, because that helped Lama Tsongkhapa to realize emptiness, because you don't fall into the extremes, you see. So that's a very powerful kind of reasoning. So that means if you contemplate, okay, the I comes up when somebody criticizes me, or when strong anger comes, or attachment, desire, and then forget about afflictions, just think about how the I appears, you know, and then you check. Body and mind are momentarily changing. There's this dependence there, you know, and the origination of coming and going. So in that process, there's no really I to be found. Yeah? And then when you see that, oh, there's no concrete I there. Everything is just cause and effect relationships. If you come to that conclusion, then it says here, the Buddhas are very happy with you, because they say, good, you're going the right direction. Now we're happy because our only wish is to liberate sentient beings, and now you are on the track. Because Arya Deva said in his 400 verses, those who don't have merit, they don't even doubt emptiness. Those who have merit, they have the capacity to doubt emptiness if the self exists or not. And that's what Arya Deva says, that shakes samsara. You know, that's the starting point of giving up samsara. You know, so that's quite a interesting quote, and statement. So it means the Buddhas are so happy with you. You know, yeah. If the Buddhas are happy, then that's the best thing you can do, because they only want us to be happy, right? So they want us to get rid of suffering. So when they're happy, that's a sign we're going the right direction. Yeah, yeah. So pleasing the Buddhas. Yeah. So then, if you, on verse 11, gives you another aspect. It says, if appearance of dependent relation, which is unbetraying, is accepted to be separate from emptiness. If you think there's two different separate things, then you haven't understood completely, because dependent relation and emptiness are two sides of a coin, right? One proves the other. Because things are dependent, what's translated here? Dependent related, that means nothing can exist from its own side. So things are empty of existing from their own side. Yeah? Or empty of inherent existence. So if you see the two as two separate things, then the Buddhas are not happy. Then they say you have to study a bit more. So far as long as they've been seen as separate, then had still not realized the Buddha's intent. You haven't really understood the meaning of the teaching of the Buddha. That's what it says. And then in the next verse it says, if these two realizations are happen simultaneously without alternation, meaning, you know, that your understanding of emptiness proves dependent relation, and your understanding of dependent relation proves emptiness. Yeah? From merely seeing dependent relation as completely unbetraying, and seeing the cause and effect as unbetraying, because nothing exists from its own side. Yeah? The definite ascertainment comes that completely destroys the way of objects are apprehended as true existence. So then if you have that kind of view, that view is complete, then you will eliminate ignorance. That's what it says, you know, in this verse number 12. Yeah, so that's kind of, so you can see it. The emptiness part is quite more verses related to that. Yeah? So first, verse 9 was the need for it. Yeah? Verse 10 is talking about how to generate it. Yeah, and seeing you did it correctly. And verse 11, see when you didn't do it correctly. And then the right view in verse 12. That means that emptiness proves, because nothing exists from its own side, that's why things are in the nature of dependent origination. Because things are in the nature of dependent origination, that's why there's emptiness. It's true, right? Because our body and mind are momentarily changing, and there's a process there. That's why there's nothing can exist from its own side. And because nothing exists from its own side, that's why there is dependent origination. Because if you have a seed here in my hands, if they put a seed here on the table, nothing will happen, right? But if there's heat, moisture, fertilization, it will grow. So the seed has a potential to grow in some plant. Yeah? But it means the seed doesn't exist from its own side. If the seed was existing from its own side, it will never produce a plant. You see that? Because growing into a plant, by depending on certain causing conditions, then it arises, right? Yeah, so it means a seed doesn't exist from its own side. Yeah, the table also doesn't exist from the own side. Zoom also doesn't exist from its own side. If Zoom exists from its own side, it will be always there and never change. And we know sometimes internet goes, even in London. We had a few issues a few times. Yeah, I couldn't believe, you know, the UK and then in London. In India, of course, sometimes, you know, place where we're living in South India in the monastery, we have sometimes days with more hours without power than hours with power. Yeah, so in the West, we never experienced that actually, but in the monastery or many places on the planet, sometimes people don't have power for hours. Yeah, so yeah, we had many times like that. So then there's no power to pump up the water, and then so you just go to the hand pump again. Yeah, that's how it is, right? So Zoom, same thing. Zoom looks very concrete, existing out there, but it can just break, right? Or there's complications in the how would say that, the provider, and there it goes. We had a few times like that. So, so that means that Zoom, it looks very concrete out there and the camera and everything, but it's dependent on many causing conditions, right? Yeah. So that means that if you understand that well, you see there is no place for concrete from its own side existing Zoom, or from its own side existing computer, or from its own existing body and mind, or from its own side existing self. That cannot really, that doesn't fit in the process of cause and effect relationships. You see that? Yeah, so that means, that proves that dependent origination proves emptiness, and emptiness proves dependent origination. Yes, two sides of a coin. Yeah. So if you have that view, then your ultimate view is complete. Yeah. Furthermore, it says in verse number 13, appearance eliminates the extreme of existence, and emptiness eliminates the extreme of non-existence. Yeah, that's a kind of uncommon presentation of Prasankhika. Keep it simple, that because things are empty of inherent existence, that's why things originate. Yeah, the same in appearance, similar way. Yeah, so it's kind of a similar aspect of two sides of a coin in simplified explanation. If you realize how emptiness manifests in a manner of cause and effect, then you are not captivated by wrong notions of holding to an extreme view, right? So that means that if you see dependent origination proves emptiness, and emptiness proves dependent origination, then you got the right understanding. Because there's a body and mind, and there's cause and effect related, there is no inherent I to be found. It doesn't fit in this process of cause and effect. And because there's no concrete I, that's why there's cause and effect. You see, that's kind of related with each other, that if things exist from their own side, it would not be possible to change it. For example, if anger existed from its own side, sometimes it appears like that, right? It feels very solid in the mind, you know, but actually it's not really existing in that way, you know, because it comes up by causing conditions that bites and disintegrates. So anger and problems, same thing. Problems in our life, sometimes they look very solid, and it's like, oh, so big, you know, so solid, and they're always there. But that's not true, right? They come by the power of cause and effect, or causing conditions. You hear something, or you think about something, and then this develops, and then it stays for some time. And then you go for a walk, and you talk with people, or something like that. Do some exercise, and then it can disappear again. So it means they don't exist from their own side, although sometimes it appears like that. But whatever appears is not reality. So it means because it's dependent on cause and effect, that's why it cannot exist from its own side, although it appears like that. Yeah, it often appears. Our problems appear very solid, you know, and the I appears very solid. But if you analyze, it's not, it cannot exist in that way because it all depends on cause and conditions. So you can see there's two sides of a coin here. Two sides, or sometimes in Nagarjuna says in the fundamental wisdom, the meaning of emptiness is dependent origination. The meaning of dependent origination is emptiness. It's very simple. Because things lack inherent existence, that's why there's dependent origination. Because there's dependent origination, that's why things lack inherent existence. So these aspects of reality, 2,500 years ago, being explained by the Buddha and clarified by the great philosophers like Nagarjuna, is very similar to the view in quantum mechanics. You know, when I had a conference and a kind of because we can have a dialogue with Carlo Rovelli, a very interesting personality in the field of quantum mechanics. He wrote many international bestsellers, as you maybe know of. He's a very interesting person. So when we talked, And we talked about this philosophy. He said, I can completely agree with this. Very interesting. He said, I'm not a Buddhist, but from the scientific perspective of quantum mechanics, it makes a lot of sense. So that means there is no concrete entity. It's just a process of cause and effect relationships of dependent origination. So our body and our mind, same thing. So if you see that, then you also see there is no concrete I to be found. If you see that aspect, then this ignorance loses potential. If ignorance loses potential, anger, attachment, jealousy, pride, anxiety, fear becomes less and less and less severe. And then the more you understand emptiness and dependent origination, then you can slowly eliminate it. Yeah. So that's actually the results of it. Yeah. And then, yeah, then the last verse, it says, having gained definite ascertainment, advice on practice. Yeah. Because just talking about it is not enough. We have to contemplate it. Otherwise, it will never produce the results. You know? So that's why it says here, in this way, you realize exactly the vital points of the three principal aspects of the path. Resort to seek solitude. Okay, bye. Yeah. So to generate the power of effort and quickly accomplish your final goal, my child. Yeah. So there's a kind of, it doesn't mean, of course, if you can live like Milarepa, it's good, you know, but yeah, we have to be realistic, you know. So yeah, then we have our own lives, and solitude doesn't mean a cave. Solitude means solitude of the mind. So that means you can stay in the middle of a city, but your mind can be in retreat, right? So we have different types of solitude. Solitude of the body, solitude of the speech, and solitude of the mind. That means if you do retreats, you put your body somewhere on a meditation cushion, right? And solitude of the speech, meaning you don't talk too much with people, because that can cause distraction, right? And then you contemplate. So then the solitude of the mind is the most difficult one. You can put yourself in a cave somewhere in the Himalayas, and you not talk to other people, but your mind might be wandering around here in London or other places of the planet, right? So the real solitude is the solitude of mind. That means what it says here in this last verse, seeking solitude, then it means to cut off distractions. That's what it means. So you can do retreats wherever you are, but the main thing is cut off distractions of your mind, to keep your mind focused on the things you're supposed to be focused upon. Yeah? Contemplate. Yeah. So that means the last verse. Yeah. And that's by Gaza. One of Lama Tsongkhapa's direct disciple, oh my child. It refers to all of us, my child, but it's kind of a close feeling, right? Lama Tsongkhapa puts there. It's very moving because Ngawan Thakpa, Ngawan Thakpa was one of the students of Lama Tsongkhapa, and he wrote a letter for advice, and then Lama Tsongkhapa replied with this particular text. So it's very profound, as you can see. You know? Yeah. I just read from Tibetan, just for auspiciousness. If people like to take a transmission, can, otherwise can just listen. Received from His Holiness and many other masters come to them, etc. Yeah. Tangi so number tsum je san lama no la cha zo gya wa sung ra kyung gi ning bo dun gya zo da ba na gi nga ga gya de tar de na gi ju mo de chi da nyu ba je shen da gi she ba cha. Yeah, that's a promise to compose the text, you know, as we saw in the beginning. Ganda si ba de la ma cha shin del ju du yu. Ja che tsum ba yi gya ba ge ba lam la yi tun be gya de da dang wa yi ngi. Listen, yeah, we talked about the three vessels, remember? Upside down and one with a hole and one with filth inside. Yeah, so prevent that. Yeah. Namdak nye jung me ba si zo yi de de ne shi va ta me ba si ba si la gang ba yi kyang lu jen nam kyu ne ching wa to mar nye jung se. So the purpose of generating renunciation, yeah, see that the drawbacks of samsara. And del jor ne ga tse la long me ba yi la gong ba tse ya nam shi do. Led Nilu Korba Dunyanam Yang Samba Jima Nangshido. Yeah, so give up the interest in this life by contemplating that and give up the interest and pressure in cyclic existence in general, yeah, by contemplating the suffering of samsara. Detar gomba korba punzo la yim kechi samyang mi kechen ninsing kyun tarpa dunya lo kyunjo jungna jungna desi jung kebala. So if you have generated this wish to be free of samsara without exception, then day and night without effort, then you have generated renunciation, right? Nyejun de yang namda semge gi si bame na lame janju gi bunzo de wa gyuro mi gyowa lo den nam gi janju choki janju sem choki. So it means if you only have renunciation but don't have supreme enlightenment achieved, so you need to generate the mind of enlightenment to achieve Buddhahood. Shuga chuo yigun yeah, so the four current rivers, all sentient beings are wandering around in cyclic existence, taken by the four powerful currents, right, of birth, sickness, aging, and death. Yeah, and be bound by karma and afflictions. And also in the iron cage and darkness of ignorance. Mime sipa geshen gewaru dugnel sungi gyunje mebana na neka bedra gyuwa manam girang netzel samne samcho kebatsu. So if you have generated, contemplated these points again and again, and then becomes spontaneous, then day and night, then you have generated bodhicitta. Nelu toba shera mi dena nejun janzen la kong je gyagyan siba tsawe che mini. So if you don't have view of dependent origination and emptiness, you will never get liberated. So that's why I put effort in understanding dependent origination. Kanshi korwa deche namtam kasa kanshi korde che namtam chigi kyunde namyang luwa me dongshi mingba tuzo kanye kyunshi ba deni sangye jeba namla shu namde tende luwa me ba dang tongwa kene dewa kowani jeze sozo nangwa jeshinde dada tuba gongba toba me. So it talks about generate correct understanding of dependent origination, right? And you see that dependent origination is the meaning of emptiness, and the meaning of emptiness is dependent origination. Then you please the Buddhas. If you don't, then you haven't realized the correct intent. Yeah. Namshi rejo meba chichadu tenda mi tongwa samni ni nge yugi zindang kyunje gan Dezi lawa juba juba la Shenyang namyang Shenyang namyang nangwe yudan Selva dan dongwu meda seljin dongbani Gyudan jebu charwa chuzan na tarsin Tarsin tawa droga mi gyuro. So yeah, Kangum said that. Detta lamgi tsowa namba suni nangi rajin chida topatsi and patente tsundu toki. So put effort, no? It says seek solitude and put effort. So we have to put some effort because emptiness and bodhicitta doesn't come just by a prayer. It would be nice, but by a pill or something like that. So you have to put effort with the mind to contemplate again and again. And but then the tsundu top in tangi do ma new Drukchikusa. Then small letters, not in English, but here to Shiba de ni mong de tuba kilon, Lotan Tapa, this Namtukapa, Pelki, Taco, Tumbo, Nawan Chapel, Gambos, and reach from the beginning. A special thing that in our future lifetimes, and every part from this teaching, Lamgit so number sung jazz and Laman, I'm not jazz or Kawasung, Nimba de Yazadamba, being Nagba Lam Gelden Tardu, Namgi Jugno de Chitar Nuba. Yeah. Okay. So that's concludes the because three principal aspect of the part in not too long, quite brief. It's quite condensed. There's a lot of information in there, but very fortunate to have went over that. It's a little bit more auspicious than just explaining. Yeah. So thank you very much for all your interest, and we still have a few minutes. If there's any question, then we can still spend a few minutes on that if you want to, but yes. Yeah.
Okay, so if anybody would like to type anything in the chat box, that's fine. Sandra will read it out.
There was one in the chat, right? Do you remember? Do you memorize?
Yeah, it's the realization of emptiness a process or direct experience.
Ale, is the realization of emptiness a process or direct experience? So the realizing of emptiness is by itself not initially not a direct experience. It's a kind of a thought process, right? So the first type is kind of look at how the eye appears and then check if the eye exists the way it appears or not. You know, so there's a conceptual understanding. That's not an experience right away. Yeah? So we need to put quite some effort. Then over time, it becomes an experience. Right? That's with all the things we learn, things we habituate, it becomes more an experience. So that's later down the line when you contemplate more, it's kind of an experience. Yeah, and it is a process in the sense of developing that experience, because initially you have to study it, contemplate, think about it, and that generates an understanding. And that's a process of understanding. And that understanding can be realized one day when you have the right conditions of accumulating merit, purifying negative deeds, studying well, making strong prayers for it to come about. Then one day it can happen that you see, oh, it's not there. So that it can happen that you contemplate, oh, look how it appears. And then you see it's not one or different from the body, or it's not one in the process or different from the process. You see it's not there. And then you say, oh, it doesn't exist. You know? So then it becomes a direct experience. Yeah. So emptiness by itself is a phenomenon that has to be experienced, but in order to experience it, you have to use reasoning to prove the way it exists. And then one day it becomes an experience. Yeah. Then was one more or not?
We have a question. We have a question from Paul saying, is it okay to be compassionate towards ourselves, or is this self-cherishing?
Compassion towards ourselves, is that self-cherishing?
Or is this self-cherishing? Yes.
So compassion to ourselves is kind of, we have to take care of ourselves, right? But there's a difference. If you put yourself as more important than others, that's a kind of self-cherishing, right? But if you, for example, be down and you want to meditate, but you cannot meditate because you're down, then it's better to take care of yourself, go for a walk and have a nice talk and relax. And then later on, you try to help others, right? So it's a kind of, we have to be realistic in our capacities. So that means if you're not capable of helping others, then it's important to make sure you yourself, on a particular level, that you can give more benefit. Yeah? So sometimes when we're a bit down or have some difficulties in life, just take a break and go for a holiday or do some sports or do some social activity, something like that, to break that cycle. And then we feel a bit better, and then of course, then we try to help others, right? Same in first aid, they teach you that, no? When you do, yeah, they say always, what do you say? First, make us, oh yeah, in a plane, for example, with your oxygen, it's a very simple one, very similar, right? In a plane, when the oxygen drops, you have to put this kind of mask, right? So then it always says, first help yourself before assisting others, right? So it's very similar. You know, if you don't help yourself, and you have others, and in the process you fall, then you harm yourself, and you can not even help the other person, right? So that's very logical. And that also in the Buddhist explanation of it, it says, without understanding suffering yourself, how can you generate the wish for suffering of others to be free? So it's, yeah. Anyway, people can relate to that, I think, no?
We do have another one, but it's from Laura, but I actually don't understand the question. So Laura, if you want to actually unmute and ask Geshe yourself.
Yes, sorry.
It's coming to you.
Yes, Sarah, I'm really sorry. So I tend to think of dependent origination using dichotomies. And in particular, I think if you have black, then you have white. If you have white, then you have black. The two things can't exist without each other. So then I kind of think, well, then if you have nirvana, you have samsara. And if you have samsara, you have nirvana, which is dangerous, because then when you take one away, the other goes away. And then my mind goes to and then what? So
and then what? Yeah.
yeah. So is it more correct to think of a dichotomy more like if samsara, then no samsara, then the emptiness of samsara, and if nirvana, then the emptiness of nirvana?
Because if you think in those two aspects, right, that means that there's a difference between samsara and nirvana, but there's a dependency on the two. One doesn't exist without the other, right? So when we talk about the concrete self or the inherent self, that is either one or different from the aggregates, for example, right? So nothing exists inherently. Yeah, so that's kind of a different aspect, because nirvana as well as samsara are empty of inherent existence. See, so but it means samsara and nirvana, they depend upon each other, because we say nirvana is based upon being free of samsara, and samsara means not having achieved nirvana. Right? So that dependence is there, and it's not you take away one and the other doesn't exist anymore, because that's not possible. You cannot take away one and the other doesn't exist anymore, because the Buddha, yeah, I mean, if you think if all sentient beings achieve nirvana or not, the Buddha didn't answer that question, right? Yeah. So, but that's one aspect. But the other aspect, where we use this black and white, or whatever you want to call it, in logical reasoning to help us to understand emptiness, and then it's very constructive, because whatever exists is either one or different from body and mind, as we know, right? So one or the other, it's either one with or different from. There's no other possibilities. So in that context, it can help our logic in the sense of the self that appears. Does it exist the way it appears or not? If so, it should be one or different from my body and mind, because there's no other possibility. So then it's just an aspect of reality as well, right? So then this kind of dualistic aspects of analyzing can help. Yeah. But those aspects of samsara and nirvana, or good and bad, they don't exist from their own side as such. They also enter in existence. So there is dependence as well. And also when we say the I that appears is one with or different from body and mind, there's also dependence there. Yeah? But that proves that there is no substantial from its own side existing as such to be found within or different from body and mind, right? So in that way, we use this dualistic aspect to prove. Yeah.
I do find it that the danger of sort of falling into nihilism with well, if you take one away, then the other will go as well. And then what? That kind of, in my mind, it goes like nihilism.
Yeah, but one doesn't fall away, because samsara and nirvana both exist, right? Our body exists, feeling exists, but it doesn't exist inherently. So that's been refuted. And so samsara exists, nirvana exists, but both, they don't exist inherently. So you have to be very clear what has actually been refuted is this inherent aspect, what is independent aspect that doesn't exist, although it appears in that way. Yeah. Because if you refute that, then it proves that there is dependence between samsara and nirvana. Because if samsara and nirvana are two separate entities existing from their own side, then you would never get out of samsara and accomplish nirvana, right? Because they were completely existing from its own side without dependence on cause and condition. You see that? So actually emptiness proves that there is this dependence, and that's why there's a correlation between samsara and nirvana, and that's why we can eliminate the afflictions and seeds, eliminate samsara, and accomplish nirvana. See that?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. That's it?
Yeah.
Yeah, no questions? Okay. All right, thank you so much for asking me again. It was kind of, what is it? Bristol, Namrim Center, right? Generally speaking. Yeah. So remember?
Yep, and Bath, Jamyang Bath, and
yeah. Yesterday Bath, now Bristol. I mean, it was initially kind of planned, but then we went online, and then it became the same thing. Yeah. So thank you so much, and then let's dedicate, because to have discussed the three principal aspects of the path is very fortunate to have done the whole stages of the path to enlightenment, and that's very, very rare, as we talked about in the beginning. Especially in rebirth is very rare, and then to talk about these points and reflect, although there's a lot of information in one text, but it puts imprints in the mind, and the more you study it and the more you contemplate it, it will help us to get better understanding and get realization. So there's a lot of merit involved and a lot of kind of positive potentials being created. So let's dedicate it into a particular direction. And that's why we do the prayers. So if we can do the dedication prayers, yeah, we can see yet. Still.
Can you see them?
No, not yet.
Yeah. Sorry, I'll just again. I'll try again.
Yeah.
So the problem here.
In Tibet we say 1, 2, 3, shuk yap. Shuk means effort, power. So we say to the computer, come on, shuk yap. Yeah, and then you press the button. Yeah. Sometimes it helps. Yeah.
Can you see them now?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
Thank you.
This one we can straight go to the dedications. Yeah, and go a bit down. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, dedicates meaning. One more. Yeah. So dedicate meaning we dedicate the merits and think to self dedication, and the aim we dedicate to is two. Also, those three are anti-inherent existence. That's the nature of dependent origination, the nature of cause and effect. And that's actually exactly why prayers come through. This cause and effect relationship. Yeah. So think that into account and then decide the spreading of the Buddha Dharma, long and healthy life with holiness, all the holy wishes to be spontaneously fulfilled, two bodhicittas, and then we're free of obstacles, a good state of enlightenment for self and others. So take it on account and decide. Dagi Jina Sabe Gewa Di Tendan Doa Gundan Gamba. Geba Jason Lozan Drabahi, think they need to think to Selje, Kare, Rave, Corve, Sintam. So Tendan Dewa, Malu Jungwe, Chere Zigwan Tenzin, Gazo, Yishap, Zit, but Zam Zam Jehin Jahan Gihun Yellow, Henzin Yong Bell, Gunze Dobo. Josum Gorvele Ahata Zodunji Gonde Shapen Janjo Sanjo Rimbo Magye Panan Kikuchi Geba Nyamba Nevaya Gone Gonde Bewa Sho Tony Tawa Rimpochi Nangeguchi Geba Nyamba Gonde Bewa Sho. As long as space remains, as long as my greater beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the suffering of greater. May the King of Dharma, Tsongkhapa's way practice flourish, may the omens of obstacles be pacified, and all conducive circumstances be complete. With the power of having made single point request to you, Rose and Dragpa, may all unfortunate manifestations of generate age, illness, famine, quarreling, epidemic diseases, counter spirits, and the prayers and support be pacified. An excellent collection of conditions. Please bless me that all my wishes be fulfilled. By evoking the power of love and kindness, compassion, and terrorism, into the force of making extensive prayers, may all sickness, war, fighting, be completely pacified, so that all beings have long, healthy, and happy lives. May the glorious Buddha's life be long and stable, and may all beings dwell in the same space of happiness, and may I, without exception, accumulate merit and purifying activities, may be blessed quickly attain good fruit. Gewa Gyunda Yanda Lama Da Dame Chogi Bella Lonje. Sadana Langi Yunda Razo Doji Changi Koban. Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you everybody for your interest, in particular the people from Bath and Bristol, yeah, Sandra and Lina. So thank you so much for Lynn and Sandra for helping organizing the thing.